Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a quieter corner of history, one wrapped in linen, perfumed with frankincense, and just slightly obsessed with the correct number of pillow charms. That's right, we're heading straight into the bedrooms of ancient Egyptian nobles. Now don't expect scandal or drama, no ghostly pharaohs or mummy chases here. Instead, what you're about to experience is something far sleepier, far stranger, and somehow even more fascinating. Because these folks took bedtime seriously. Like, ritually serious. We're talking sacred oils for the left foot only. Gods of dreams getting nightly shout-outs. And servants whose sole job was to fan you in absolute silence until you drifted off under the stars and the ever-watchful eye of Horus. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's deeply boring in the most exquisite way possible. You'll find yourself pondering how many amulets is too many amulets, and whether or not your pillow should be made of stone. Spoiler, theirs often were. So before you get cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this sleepy little corner of YouTube where nothing explodes and history mostly sighs itself to sleep. And hey, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I love knowing who's out there, drifting off with me in all corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you are standing in a shaded courtyard. The limestone walls around you are warm from the sun, but the breeze carries a whiff of blue lotus, muddled slightly with something more pungent, perhaps the last steaming pot of resin incense for the evening. A servant girl moves past, barefoot, balancing a jug of water wrapped in linen to keep it cool. The air is slowing down. So is everyone in it. In the life of a noble family, the day did not end when the sun dipped behind the horizon. It only changed gears. As night approached, candles made of beeswax were placed in polished copper holders, and long strips of linen were soaked in fragrant oils, frankincense, myrrh, and the ever-popular blue lotus, which had both spiritual and mildly narcotic properties. These linens would be draped gently over pillows or waved gently through the air to perfume the chamber. In some households, specialized servants, often older women known for their discretion, were tasked solely with preparing the sleeping chamber. They would unroll the mats, plump the linen-filled headrests, and lay out the nightwear, usually another finer linen robe, bleached white and soft as river foam. Sleep, for the ancient Egyptian elite, was not just rest. It was a vulnerable passage through the realm of dreams, where the boundary between the human and the divine dissolved, and to journey safely, one needed the right tools. One of these tools was sound. Before bed, nobles often requested musical performances, not loud songs or dramatic harp solos, but soft chanting or the plucking of a few notes from a lyre strung with animal gut. The goal wasn't entertainment, it was alignment. The priests taught that harmony in sound reflected harmony in spirit. So when you hear the whisper of stringed instruments in your mind's ear, know that it once filled these chambers too, guiding men and women toward a more orderly sleep. Interestingly, nobles often slept with their faces to the north. This was considered the direction of the afterlife, where the god Osiris ruled, and aligning one's body in that direction encouraged peaceful, protected slumber. Bed frames, when present, were usually wooden and raised, sometimes with carved lion's feet or depictions of sacred symbols. But the pillows would not have suited modern sensibilities. They were headrests, curved supports made of wood, ivory, or even stone, designed to lift the neck and keep intricate hairstyles intact. Odd as they may seem now, they served both hygienic and spiritual purposes. Another object often overlooked in historical summaries of Egyptian life, the cone, the sajand from wax infused with perfumes and sometimes crushed petals. These scent cones were placed atop the head, particularly for women, and allowed to slowly melt and release fragrance through the evening. While some scholars debate whether they were worn only at feasts or during everyday life, artistic depictions suggest that some noble women wore them even while reclining or preparing for bed. And then there were the dreams. Dreams were not mere byproducts of sleep to the Egyptians. They were messages, clues, sometimes even warnings. To prepare for sleep was in part to prepare to be spoken to. Dream interpreters, often priests trained in the mysteries of the temple, kept detailed ledgers of symbols. A crocodile in your dream could mean enemies or protection, depending on what it was doing. To dream of papyrus reeds, that might mean a letter was coming, or a secret, or even pregnancy. Some nobles, especially those who believed themselves especially favored by Thoth or Horus, kept what we might call dream journals, not on paper of course, but carved onto clay tablets, or written in ink on strips of papyrus. These would be reviewed each morning with careful attention, sometimes even shown to a family priest or scribe. And if a dream was considered dangerous or unlucky, an amulet might be worn the next night to ward off its return. Popular charms included the Eye of Horus for protection, or the scarab beetle for rebirth and safe passage through the dream world. Children's bedtime, too, followed curious customs, though noble children slept in separate rooms, often with a nurse or caretaker nearby. They were sometimes lulled to sleep by stories, not unlike the ones you're hearing now. But these tales were not about princes and princesses. They were about gods and monsters, serpents in the underworld, and trickster animals who fooled death. Sleep, after all, was considered a form of practice for dying, and to prepare children for the afterlife. They were gently introduced to its architecture through story. In noble households, silence was precious. So instead of bustling about in clogs or wooden sandals, nighttime servants padded around barefoot, often signaled by bells or soft claps rather than speech. It was thought that too much noise near the bed could disrupt the soul's departure and return, and so a kind of hush fell across the upper floors of noble homes, just the shush of linen, the flicker of oil lamps, and the gentle scrape of wax on stone. Even pets had their place. Cats, of course, were everywhere, symbols of protection, sometimes even mummified after death, and placed at the feet of their owner's bed. But lapdogs, monkeys, and ibises were also known to accompany nobles to sleep. Some were dressed in miniature linen wraps. Others simply curled up near the bed, watching with the heavy-lidded patience only ancient pets could master. And finally, there were the prayers. Sleep in ancient Egypt was not taken for granted. Each night, nobles recited invocations, short, rhythmic phrases to gods like Bes, the protector of households, or Nephthys, who watched over the dead. These prayers were sometimes whispered, sometimes written and placed beneath the bed, and always spoken with the understanding that sleep was a rehearsal for death, and waking, a small kind of resurrection. So now, picture yourself lying beneath a canopy of reeds and stars. Your skin smells faintly of resin and river water. The linen beneath you is cool. The cone atop your head melts slowly, fragrancing your dreams. You do not sleep alone. The gods are listening. And in the quiet of that perfumed dark, as your soul drifts softly toward Osiris, you may wonder what exactly happened when a noble dreamed something they weren't supposed to. If you were to wake in the middle of the night in Thebes, sometime during the 18th dynasty, surrounded by silence, broken only by the creaking of wood or the distant howling of desert dogs, you might not simply roll over and return to sleep. You might instead sit upright, touch the amulet strung around your neck, and reach for a papyrus scroll to record the vivid dream that startled you awake. For to the noble class of ancient Egypt, dreams were not private. They were public matters of divine communication, and sometimes, dangerously, miscommunication. Let us ease back into the soft hush of a noble household, where cool water jugs bead with condensation and incense. Ash collects in shallow bronze dishes. By now, the nobleman, or woman, has long since fallen asleep. But what happens when a dream unfolds in the wrong direction? When a crocodile chases instead of bows? When a shadow appears behind the god's shoulder in the dream? Such imagery, to the modern mind, might mean little, but to the dream interpreters of ancient Egypt, it could indicate betrayal in the household, poison in a jar, or worse, an omen sent by an angry god. In Thebes, professional dream readers weren't always priests. Some were scribes trained in one of the many books of dreams, collections of symbols and their interpretations etched onto papyrus. These books were not secret. but they were not casual reading either. One such text, discovered in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, reveals a fascinating mix of predictions. Dream of drinking beer, good, joy is coming. Dream of eating crocodile meat, bad, legal trouble awaits. Dream of seeing your own reflection in water, confusion and loss. In noble circles, these interpretations were taken seriously, very seriously. Let us follow the imagined path of a nobleman named Nesamun, a mid-ranking administrator in Thebes. One night, Nesamun dreams of a falcon perched on his shoulder. To you or me, that may seem majestic, but Nesamun knows the falcon represents Horus, the god of kingship, and such proximity might suggest a challenge to Pharaoh's authority, or a personal ambition he dare not admit. At dawn, before breakfast, Nesamun sends a servant to the house of Kenti, a blind scribe who serves as a dream reader. Kenti listens, silently, as Nesamun recounts his dream in careful detail. Not just the falcon, but the colour of the sky, the texture of the ground, the scent of the wind. When Kenti replies, "It is with neither alarm nor comfort. You are being seen," he says. "Walk backward through your home today. Speak only truth. Burn cedar at your doorstep." Such advice might sound strange, even superstitious. But in Nesamun's time, following these rituals was not mere obedience. It was insurance. Insurance against the divine, the unpredictable, the hidden threads that seem to bind daily life to the god's pleasure. And indeed, sleep was only one side of that thread. The waking world, too, was full of rituals meant to safeguard the journey into unconsciousness. Some nobles kept sleep stelae in their bedrooms, small stone slabs inscribed with protective texts or hymns to particular deities. These stelae, often dedicated to Bes or Hathor, acted as spiritual sentinels. They were not decorative, they were functional. Some included invocations like, "May I wake with the sun, renewed as Re emerges from the underworld." Others requested protection from wandering spirits believed to roam the night, especially in cities near necropolises. It is here that we must pause to consider the architecture of sleep in a Theban noble house, not just the furniture, but the flow of space. Noble houses were usually built around a central courtyard, with rooms fanning out from the middle like petals. The sleeping chamber was often located on the upper level, where breezes could reach and insects were less bothersome, but sleep rarely happened in isolation. A noble's chamber might include servants sleeping on mats nearby, or family members in alcoves, separated by thin linen drapes. Privacy, as we think of it today, was not common. Sleep was communal, gently observed, and curated by a caste of attendants. These attendants had their own responsibilities. One might be in charge of fanning the noble with palm fronds if the night grew too warm. Another might keep a pot of heated stones wrapped in cloth to place near the feet if the air turned cool. A third might tend to the incense cone, ensuring it didn't burn too quickly or snuff out prematurely. Some even sang softly, not lullabies exactly, but repetitive chants invoking the night's guardians. And there were guardians. The god Bez, ugly, squat, bearded, and eternally frowning, was one of the most popular figures in bedtime rituals. Though grotesque in appearance, he was beloved, a kind of spiritual bouncer who kept nightmares, demons, and bad dreams at bay. Small statues of Bes often adorned headboards, oil lamps, or even the handles of hairbrushes. For noble women especially, Bes was essential, protector of mothers, children, and sleepers. It was said that invoking him before bed could keep sleep undisturbed and fertility intact. Another lesser-known protector was Taret, the hippo-headed goddess of childbirth and domesticity. Her round belly and lion paws made her a comforting, if peculiar, presence near the bed. Often households would keep clay amulets of both Taret and Bes near the sleeping area, sometimes with inscriptions that read, "Guard this house from the claws of the unseen." But sleep was not always uninterrupted. Even with these measures, sometimes the Nile rose too high, and the croaking of frogs and buzz of mosquitoes pierced the night. Other times, a noble might wake to hear the haunting ululation of mourners at a nearby funeral, ceremonies that often continued deep into the night. Death, after all, never slept. And to live beside tombs and temples was to accept the constant hum of the afterlife, just beyond the shuttered window. On rare occasions, nobles suffered from what might now be called sleep paralysis, a terrifying sensation described in scrolls as the presence of a weight upon the chest or the feeling of drowning in linen. These episodes were interpreted not as medical phenomena, but as spiritual invasions. The affected noble would summon a priest, who might burn particular resins or recite a protection spell from the Book of the Dead. If the dreams returned the next night, stronger charms were worn, bronze rings etched with sacred animals, or even live beetles, pinned to strips of cloth and tied around the wrist. It's worth noting that the preparation for bed extended beyond the bedroom. Even gardens played a role. Many nobles kept nighttime gardens, not just for aesthetics, but for scent. Sweet herbs like mint, chamomile, and henna were planted along pathways and courtyards. At night, as the air cooled, their fragrance grew stronger. Servants were known to brush the leaves before bed, releasing scent into the wind that drifted up into open windows. It was believed that this aromatic air lulled the gods and the sleepers alike. The strangest part, perhaps, is that sleep was never quite personal. It belonged to the household, to the community, to the gods. A noble did not simply fall asleep. They were escorted into sleep, protected during it, and gently awakened from it by servants who offered water, palm dates, or, on special days, honeyed cakes left over from the temple's offerings. So what then, if a dream warned of betrayal? What if a noble saw themselves falling from a chariot, or being devoured by a serpent, or kissed by a jackal-headed figure in the sand? Some wrote it down and forgot it. Others built entire rituals to cleanse the mind before the next night. A few left the city altogether, seeking purer air or quieter temples or different stars under which to dream. And sometimes the dreams simply returned, again and again, as if trying to say something. But what? The sun does not rise quickly in Thebes. It slides, silently and with ceremony, across the rooftops and palm leaves, casting slow golden light across the Nile and through the shuttered windows of noble houses. Within those upper rooms where wax had melted, prayers had been whispered, and incense had drifted like fog. The noble classes of ancient Egypt began to stir. But waking, like sleep, was not rushed. To awaken properly was to re-enter the world with grace. You were not simply rising from slumber, you were being reborn just as Re was reborn each morning in the eastern sky. And this rebirth was not to be marred by abruptness. No shouting, no splashing, no sudden noise. The chamber was still dim, oil lamps still flickering. Servants crept in with fresh linen wraps, a shallow basin of cool water, and a mirror of polished copper. The noble would be roused not with alarm but with offerings. A small tray, dates soaked in wine, a scoop of figs, maybe a cake made from barley and honey, a carved ivory spoon dipped gently into a jar of thick perfumed oil, often made from moringa or castor, to soften the skin after sleep. Hands were washed, faces were wiped gently. The scent of last night's incense still clung to the air, mingled now with the first faint breeze of morning. The nobleman or noblewoman might stretch, slowly, beneath the same linen canopy that had shaded their dreams. Their head would lift from the curved headrest, and they might rub the imprint from their neck with fingers trained by habit. Before stepping down from the bed, one's feet were often anointed with oil, not a luxury, but a hygienic step in a world of dust and sand. It also bore symbolic weight, a clean path for the soul's return to the body. And then before any speaking, before any official business or movement through the house, a moment of pause. The noble would often stand facing east, eyes closed or half-lidded, murmuring a soft prayer to Ra, not just to give thanks for waking, but to welcome the light. This brief invocation echoed the journey made during sleep, a metaphysical path through the Duat, the realm of the dead, where one's heart might be weighed, one's deeds recalled, and one's body made vulnerable to unseen dangers. To survive sleep was no small thing. Among the nobles, this idea of sleep as trial and waking as triumph ran deep. So too did the belief that dreams could cling to the skin like sand after a storm, that they needed to be washed off, written out, or offered up to someone wiser than oneself. Thus, the morning routine included not just ablutions but discussions. Scribes were summoned. A priest, if the night had been particularly troubling, a trusted family member. Sometimes, the dream was spoken aloud. It was examined, much like a cracked vase, from every angle, under every light. What did it mean that you dreamed of a tree that bled? What does it mean to fly over the Nile but never land? Some dreams were written down and stored, rolled papyrus scrolls sealed with wax, placed into clay jars alongside cosmetic powders or sacred oils. Others were burned, not out of fear, but reverence, ashes rising like silent petitions to the heavens. The beds themselves were inspected, not by the noble but by servants who checked for signs, not of insects or broken joints, but of omens. A streak of spilled oil in the wrong direction, a fragment of a broken comb on the floor, linen that had twisted during the night into the shape of a snake. These small details were sometimes seen as portents, and their meanings recorded in small household logs, typically maintained by the eldest servant or illiterate spouse. Even the pets were watched, a cat pacing in circles at dawn, an ibis facing west. These were not dismissed. Animals, after all, were thought to possess a more direct line to the spirit world. Their behavior at morning could confirm or contradict a dream's message, but for all these rituals, there was an unspoken truth among the elite. Sleep, with all its perfumes and precautions, remained a place of danger, a nightly gamble, and no noble, no matter how pious or prepared, was fully immune to what might happen while their eyes were closed. This gave rise to certain habits, peculiar to us perhaps, but entirely ordinary in their world. Some nobles refused to sleep in the same room 2 nights in a row. Others rotated the direction of their bed each week to confuse the spirits. There were those who believed that changing the oil used on the cone atop their head would influence the nature of their dreams. Some even refused to speak of dreams at all, believing that voicing them gave them power. And yet, despite all this, the morning always came. Slowly, the house would stir. Servants swept the floors, water carriers filled the jars, the smell of flat bread baking in courtyard ovens replaced the scent of burning resin. The noble would descend the stairs, robes loose, eyelids still heavy, but no longer fragile. The day had begun. But beneath the surface of routine, the washing, the breakfast, the greetings, remained the dream. That odd scene involving a fish with human eyes, that falling sensation, that moment in the dream where a voice said something incomprehensible. It lingered, like perfume in the folds of a robe. Over time, some nobles came to see their dreams as part of their personal mythology, as stories layered within stories, as prophecies waiting not for priests, but for time itself to make sense of them. And when they reached old age, those few who outlived wars, fevers, and the shifting whims of pharaohs, many nobles requested to be buried with their dream scrolls, not just their name, titles, and lineage, but the strange, flickering visions that had haunted or comforted them each night. Perhaps they believed the gods might read them in the afterlife. Perhaps the dreams would explain what the waking world could not. So the next time you close your eyes and drift into some half-remembered world, imagine you are not alone. That thousands of years ago, another sleeper placed their head on a curved wooden rest, surrounded by silence and scent and gods, and waited for a dream. And if that dream never ended, would anyone have known? Settle back, gently. Let the light in your mind dim to candle glow, and picture yourself beneath the stone archways of a cold and lonely abbey. Outside, the winds of a medieval winter claw at the edges of the world. Inside, the walls do not echo with laughter or music, they breathe in silence. This is not a palace, nor a home. It is a monastery. And sleep, here, is not comfort. It is caution, sometimes even punishment. We are in England. The year is 1472. The Wars of the Roses flicker in distant towns. But here, in the cloistered stillness of the Fenlands, a Benedictine monk named Brother Thomas is preparing for bed. That is to say, he is preparing not to sleep, For monks like Thomas, sleep was both a necessity and a spiritual danger. Too much of it dulled the mind, weakened the body, and opened one to temptation. Too little, and one could fall into illness, or worse, error. And so the balance was delicate, like the sand in an hourglass, and every grain mattered. In this monastery, the day begins and ends, not with the sun, but with the bell. The bell tolls for prayer, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, and between these prayers the monks labour, copy manuscripts, chant psalms, and eat in silence. The only time that is truly their own is the time in bed, or at least what little of it is allowed. The rule of Saint Benedict, composed in the 6th century, and still followed in variations throughout medieval Europe, sets strict guidelines for sleep. According to the rule, monks should sleep each in separate beds, if possible, clothed and ready to rise at the toll of the nocturnal bell. They are not to speak, not to delay, not to dream, ideally, but of course they do. Let us return to Brother Thomas. His bed is not soft. It is a wooden plank raised a few inches above the ground, with a sack of straw for padding and a rough woolen blanket dyed the colour of old ash. There is no pillow, only a folded robe, no sheets, no warmth, except that which his own body can produce. His chamber is shared with 5 other monks. A single candle burns near the doorway, low and flickering, casting shadows on the cracked plaster walls. Before lying down, Thomas kneels, not on a cushion, but directly on the stone floor. He mutters the Compline psalm under his breath. I will lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. And then, still in his robe, belt loosened but not removed, he lies back, not to rest, but to resist. Sleep, to Thomas, is not an escape. It is a discipline, a thing to be managed, not enjoyed. His order allows roughly 6 hours of sleep per night, but not consecutively. Matins is called in the dead of night. Sometimes as early as 2 a.m, the bell clangs through the dark, echoing off cloisters and stone columns. The monks rise groggily, file into the chapel, and chant by lamplight for an hour or more. When the service ends, they return to their cells to sleep again, if they can. This interruption, known as the night office, is not arbitrary. It is designed to break the cycle of indulgence, to remind the brothers that even sleep belongs to God, that the night, though silent, is not idle. Some monks, those of stricter orders like the Carthusians, go further still. They sleep sitting upright on benches, heads slumped forward onto their chests, or resting on a sloped board nailed to the wall. Some wear hair shirts to bed, itching, scratchy garments meant to mortify the flesh. A few even place small wooden crosses beneath their spines, so that they are never too comfortable, never truly at ease. The logic is not cruelty, it is vigilance. If comfort breeds complacency, then the monk must reject it, even in dreams. But despite these efforts, dreams come. Brother Thomas once confessed, in the quiet of a dawn confessional, that he had dreamed of apples, not sacred apples, not symbolic ones, but large, red, glossy apples, like those he used to eat as a boy in his mother's orchard. He woke hungry, not for food, but for memory. That was the danger. For in the monastery, even dreams could be sinful, not because of their content, but because they threatened to unmoor the monk from his present state of surrender. They could reawaken longing, pride, fear, the self. That is why, each morning after prayers, monks participated in collation, a brief gathering not just to hear scripture, but to confess their failings of the night. I dreamed of vanity, one might say. I grew restless in the dark, another might add. These admissions were not dramatic. They were murmured, like the rest of monastic life, low, steady, and without flourish. But let us return to the sleeping arrangements. Beds were aligned in neat rows. Each monk's straw sack was identical. Possessions were minimal: a candle stub, a small crucifix, perhaps a book of psalms. The air was often damp, especially in winter, and rats were not unknown. The monks did not speak of this. discomfort was part of the path, and in some abbeys, particularly in colder parts of northern England or Scotland, monks were allowed to sleep in their habits, long robes made of undyed wool, because otherwise they might not survive the night. Monastic sleep, in short, was not a luxury. It was a battleground. But there were exceptions. Some abbots, more lenient or more humane, allowed their brothers to drink a small cup of warmed wine mixed with herbs before bed. This sleep draught was believed to steady the mind and settle the stomach. The recipe varied, sometimes chamomile, sometimes lavender or sage. It was administered not as indulgence but as medicine, to help ensure that the monk's mind did not wander too far in the dark. Others experimented with prayerful visualization, a practice encouraged by certain mystics, involved imagining oneself asleep in the tomb beside Christ, wrapped in linen, watched over by angels. This was not meant to be grim. It was meant to soothe, to shift one's dreams away from apples and hunger toward light and stillness. And still, the temptations came. There were nights when Brother Thomas, despite his vows, despite his discipline, lay awake under his rough woolen blanket and felt the memory of warmth, a hearth, a woman's voice, a name. These things had not been spoken in years, but memory is patient. It waits, and sometimes sleep opens a door. The bell would toll again. Matins. He would rise. He would pray. He would not speak of what he saw in the dark. Not yet. And so we begin to ask, if sleep is meant to refresh the soul, but the soul fears what it dreams, how does one ever wake clean? Imagine again the cold stones beneath your feet, the rhythmic creak of the ancient dormitory beams, and the whisper of wool against straw. It is the middle of the night, and Brother Thomas has returned from matins. The candlelight is low. His breath curls faintly in the chilled air. His bed, if it can be called that, awaits him like a lesson, firm and unforgiving, and he is not alone. Though spoken words are forbidden in the dormitory, the monks are not unaware of one another. Each is a rhythm in the communal silence. The way Brother Ambrose shifts before lying flat on his back, how Brother Ewan always coughs once before settling. The monastery is a vessel, and each monk is a ripple barely noticed but ever present. This familiarity, however quiet, can be a comfort and a danger, because even in monasteries, even in the disciplined halls of Benedictine and Cistercian life, not all sleep is innocent. Let us consider a peculiar role found in some monasteries, the night watch monk, sometimes referred to as the custos nocturnus. This monk was tasked with rising not only for matins, but also once or twice during the sleeping hours to walk silently through the dormitory, ensuring that no one had fallen ill, spoken aloud, or worse, succumbed to private temptation. He carried a small lantern, often with a piece of cloth wrapped around it, to dim the light. He walked barefoot. He made no sound unless he encountered wrongdoing, and when he did not scold. He recorded a brief mark in the priory ledger, a quiet word to the abbot, a punishment assigned days later, never connected directly, but always understood. Brother Thomas once saw him, briefly, as he pretended to sleep. The flicker of the lantern, the shadow of a face, the almost inaudible click of a bead sliding on a tally string. The idea behind the watchful monk was not surveillance for punishment, but for prevention, a gentle reminder that even in darkness, someone was awake, someone was watching, and if someone watched, God must surely be doing the same. This system discouraged rebellion, but it also discouraged confession, because what monk would admit to restless thoughts, to haunted dreams, when a single moment of weakness might be noted, might be discussed behind the thick oak doors of the chapter house? Thus many monks developed coping mechanisms. Some took to reciting verses in their minds until sleep returned. Others created mental exercises, counting breaths, imagining the Psalms as footsteps in a labyrinth, visualizing the names of saints carved into stones. A few composed their own quiet prayers, not from scripture, but from memory and hope. One of these, attributed to a monk in Nili in the early 1400s, survives in a marginal note in a psalter: "Let the dark be neither blessing nor burden, but simply the Lord's unlit hour." Still, sleep came unpredictably, And when it came with dreams, those dreams had to be handled. Morning confessions became a kind of gentle theatre. A monk might say, "I dreamed of running," and the brothers would nod solemnly. Another might say, "I forgot the words of the midnight psalm," and he would be assigned an extra hour of copying or silence. But beneath these admissions, there often lay other truths, dreams of family, of hunger, of questions about faith too tangled to voice. In monasteries that held more lenient traditions, Cluniac houses for example, there was a somewhat more open approach to dreams. Certain abbots believed that some dreams were sent by God and should be interpreted. They held informal dream councils, where monks could speak of visions without fear of censure. One monk, Brother Silas of Cluny, claimed to have seen an image of the Virgin offering him a loaf of bread. He was praised for this. Another dreamed of a fox with a bishop's ring in its mouth. He was asked to fast for 3 days and remain silent for 5. Interpretation, you see, was not science. It was structure. And still the nights continued. A monk like Thomas, bound by his Benedictine vows, was not permitted indulgence in bodily comfort. But the body remembers what the mind forgets. A warm hearth once sat beneath his mother's window, a feather pillow, a carved headboard. These things do not leave the bones easily. To prevent memory from overtaking discipline, some monasteries replaced beds altogether with stone niches, small alcoves cut directly into the dormitory wall, like graves still waiting. A monk would step into his alcove, wrap his robe tightly, and lean against the wall until sleep took him standing. It was rare, but it happened. Other monasteries experimented with what we might call rotational discomfort. Each week, a monk would be assigned a new bed. Some were placed near windows, others near the kitchen chimney. Some were intentionally draughty. The idea was not cruelty but humility. No man should grow attached to a place of rest. Still, despite all efforts, the longing remained for warmth, for rest without interruption, for the soft forgetfulness that only true sleep could offer. Brother Thomas sometimes found it briefly, on summer nights, when the air was soft and the bells seemed further away. He would drift into a dreamless void, neither spiritual nor profane, just silence, just rest. But more often he hovered, light sleep, alert to the sound of bells, of footsteps, of whispers. The monastery did not punish him for this, but it never encouraged him either. Some monks, upon reaching old age or frailty, were granted leniency, a softer bed, a longer rest. These men were envied, but not resented. They had earned their burdens, and when they passed, their beds were stripped, the straw discarded, the wooden frame scrubbed with vinegar and ash. A new monk would arrive, he would kneel, he would lie down, and the cycle would continue. But still one wonders, if no man slept well, and all dreams were silenced, what did they truly rest from? The years passed slowly, in a monastery. The seasons changed not by colour or festival, but by the shift in chores, the weight of woolen robes, and the pattern of the light falling on stone. And so it was that Brother Thomas, once the youngest monk in his dormitory, had become one of its oldest. His hands, once nimble with a penknife trimming quills, now trembled slightly when he held the lamp for matins. His voice, once clear in the psalms, now rasped like dry parchment. He still rose for prayers, still folded his robe precisely each night, but something had changed. He had begun to dream again, not every night, and not vividly, but the dreams came more easily now, soft, slow, and unthreatening. He dreamed of the abbey corridors filled with flowers, or of climbing trees from his boyhood, of washing linen in a river, with strangers whose names he didn't know, but whose presence felt comforting. He did not confess these dreams. They were not sins. They were memories returning in borrowed shapes. In the eyes of the rule, he was still a monk, but in the eyes of his brothers, Thomas had become something else, a watchman of silence. He no longer copied manuscripts or gardened. He sat, often by the cloister walk in the early hours, warming his hands over a stone brazier, eyes watching the courtyard, but seeing nothing at all. Some monks feared this stillness, afraid it was madness, or worse, indifference, but others saw it as a kind of mastery. the end stage of a life that had been shaped, piece by piece, around resisting comfort. His bed had changed too, no longer a plank, but a rope mattress, softened with layered straw, and occasionally lined with old linen torn from choir robes. It was not luxurious, but it was kind. And Thomas, old and tired, had finally been granted the grace of undisturbed rest. No midnight bell, no night office, only the gentle rhythm of breath and the silence between psalms. But the monastery around him continued its steady march. New monks came, young, nervous, clumsy with their laces, and overly eager to speak when silence was required. They asked questions about sleep. Was it allowed to yawn? Could they sleep on their side? What if they heard voices in their dreams? Thomas never corrected them. He only smiled, faintly, as if remembering a question he'd once asked and long since forgotten the answer to. In time, one young monk, Brother Adolfric, began assisting Thomas in the evenings, helping him to the dormitory, warming his drinking cup with nettle and mint. They never spoke much, but one evening, Adolfric dared to ask, in a hushed voice, "Brother, what do you see when you sleep now?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. The candles sputtered. The wind pressed faintly at the shutters. Finally, he replied, "Nothing I remember, but I wake more whole." It was the truest answer he could give, for in old age, the struggle against comfort had eased. The body, once trained to avoid softness, now accepted it like an old friend. The soul, once wary of dreams, now treated them like footnotes, useful, sometimes poetic, but not binding. Sleep had become a return, not a trial. And yet the rituals remained. Every night, even in his final months, Thomas would fold his habit precisely, light a single taper, and murmur the Compline prayer, not out of fear, not out of obedience, but out of habit. A habit so deeply worn, it had become part of the skin, part of the bed, part of the silence itself. When he died, it was expected. No drama, no sudden illness. One morning, the bell for prime rang, and Thomas did not stir. Brother Adolfric found him lying peacefully on his side, one hand resting lightly on a wooden crucifix, the other beneath his head. He had, it seemed, finally allowed himself to turn toward comfort, and comfort had come. The dormitory was cleaned, his bed stripped. The brothers gathered in the chapel, their chant low and steady. But what lingered, more than his absence, was the space he had carved wordlessly, patiently, between discipline and surrender. For centuries after, monks would still wrestle with the same questions. How much sleep is too much? What role do dreams play? Can the soul wander safely at night? Rules would shift. Some orders would allow pillows, others would permit longer rest for the aged or infirm. But the core remained that sleep, for monks, is never just sleep. It is a vow, a silent one, but no less binding. And still we wonder if sleep is no longer the enemy, but a friend arrived late. What happens when it stays forever? The light in the scholar's study was not extinguished. It faded, like ink bleeding gently into the edge of rice paper. In the eastern city of Luoyang, once the capital of the Han dynasty, bedtime arrived, not with yawns or bells, but with the slow, deliberate movements of brush and robe. Here, in the residence of a mid-ranking Confucian scholar named Zhang Ren, the act of sleep was something more than rest. It was an extension of the written line, a pause between ideas, a punctuation mark at the end of a day's thought. Let us step inside, slowly, into Zhang Ren's world. The floor is lacquered wood, polished with tea leaves and pine oil. The scent is sharp but faint. His bed is not soft. It is a raised wooden platform with a woven reed mat stretched tightly across it. It creaks when sat upon, not out of neglect, but by design. The discomfort was intentional. Cushions were few, and what little existed was filled with dried rushes and stitched in uneven rows, more decorative than useful. Zhang Ren wore his sleep like he wore his philosophy, plain, precise, restrained. His sleeping robe was dyed pale indigo, barely different from the one he wore to read or write. Its threads were loose enough to breathe in the heat, but woven thick enough to resist the cold of night. His sandals, worn smooth at the heel, rested precisely beside the platform. He would remove them without bending, slide them into alignment with one toe, and never look down to confirm they were straight. He knew they were. Sleep for scholars like Zhang Ren was not spontaneous. It was prepared for quietly, methodically, and with reverence. As the sun slipped behind the tiled roofs of Luoyang, his servant would enter with a pot of hot water steeped with jujube bark and wild chrysanthemum. It was bitter and slightly cooling to the stomach. The scholar would sip it slowly, his brush still in hand, finishing one final character before placing it back in its holder. The scroll would be rolled carefully, pressed flat with a polished jade weight, and returned to its carved bamboo case. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was excessive. The Han dynasty prized restraint as much as knowledge. Before retiring, Zhang Ren would light a single oil lamp and place it on a small shelf near his bed, not to read, but to cast a dim, warm glow over the empty space. The flame danced slightly in the summer breeze, sneaking through the lattice window, and its shadow painted wavering lines across the ceiling, like half-formed calligraphy. The room contained almost nothing. A writing table, a scroll rack, a water basin, a low shelf for wooden pillows, and a corner basket with cedar shavings to scent the room. There were no decorations save for a single wall hanging of Lazy riding an ox into mist, a gift from a visiting poet now long dead. It was said the ox's hooves were not touching the ground in the painting, and indeed they were not. Before bed, Zhang Ren did not pray, not in the way a Westerner might expect. He reflected, recited aloud passages from the Analects, lines about self-discipline, about moderation, about kindness to one's mother. It was said that by repeating such phrases, one might carry them into the dream world and return with better answers. Dreams, to the Han scholar, were not dismissed nor obsessed over. They were studied, but not feared. Dreams might bring ancestral advice, or caution, or reveal buried thoughts best left unnamed. Some scholars kept dream books, bamboo strips bound together with silk cord, filled with brief, almost haiku-like notes. Dreamt of broken brush, spoke too harshly today. To dreamt of flooded bridge, mother's health. To dreamt of ox asleep beside me, read more slowly tomorrow. Zhang Ren's own book was stored beneath his bed, wrapped in yellow cloth. He wrote in it rarely, only when the dream came with sound. Servants did not attend him overnight. Han scholars valued privacy in their sleeping chambers. He would extinguish the lamp himself, listening to the quiet of the courtyard beyond. Crickets, the soft creak of bamboo, the padded steps of a cat chasing a beetle across roof tiles. In the distance, if the wind was right, one might hear the watchman's rattle, marking the hour. Zhang Ren would lie on his side atop the reed mat, head resting on a curved wooden pillow carved with lotus petals. He had two, one for guests, though few ever stayed. The coolness of the pillow's polished surface was a reminder to think clearly. Pillows were not for comfort, they were for posture. If one slept well, one woke upright, and sleep itself, it came slowly. Not because he resisted it, but because he allowed it to arrive like a visitor. One had to make space for it. Empty the mind. Breathe through the nose. Recite the classics. Not from obligation, but from ease. He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in danger. Saint. So superior man is modest in speech, but exceeds in action. Outside, the moon rose. Its silver light filtered through the window lattice in broken squares. Somewhere, a neighbour's child coughed in their sleep. Somewhere else, a drunk merchant sang off-key before collapsing into slumber. But here, in this room, sleep arrived in silence. And when it did, it was not recorded. It was simply accepted. But sometimes, Zhang Ren would wake in the night, not in fear, not in confusion, but in thought. A phrase, half finished, would emerge from a dream. He would sit up, light the lamp again, take up his brush, and write it carefully on the back of a practice scroll. The ox moves slowly, but it does not stumble. Then he would return to bed, not because he was tired, but because the thought had passed, And so we begin to wonder if sleep is a scroll unrolled nightly, and dreams are the ink that stains it. How does one know which marks are truly worth remembering? The city is still wrapped in night, though the moon has drifted westward, and the lamplight has burned low. Within the sleeping chamber of scholar Zhang Ren, time is not tracked by ticking clocks or mechanical chimes. It is known by the rhythm of the oil in the lamp, by the pattern of the wind through the window screen, and by the feel of the linen mat beneath his hands when he wakes without knowing why. This is the hour between waking and sleep, when the mind is most tender. The scholar, now seated quietly by his writing table, does not rush. He unwraps the silk cord from his bamboo dream book and adds a line, "Dreamt I had no shadow, was I still standing?" He reads it twice, then sets the stylus down. In Han society, dreams did not belong to mystics or temples alone. They belonged to thinkers, philosophers, even emperors. And while commoners might seek dream interpretation from folk shamans in the markets, people with red ink on their hands and jade amulets in their hair, scholars like Zhang Ren used different tools. They compared dreams to text. They analyzed them the way one might read a corrupted scroll, with care, curiosity, and the quiet knowledge that much would remain unreadable. In Luoyang's scholar circles, it was common for friends to share their dreams over tea the next morning, not to amuse, but to reflect. A dream of a cracked inkstone might reveal anxiety about one's writing. A dream of one's teacher holding a burning fan might suggest tension or envy. These were not superstitions. They were metaphors the mind offered in the absence of clarity. Still, not all dreams were shared. Zhang Ren once had a dream not long ago of walking barefoot through the Imperial Library. The shelves were empty, the scrolls were gone, and a voice behind him whispered, "Then why did you come?" He did not write this one down. Some dreams, even in a rationalist world, struck too close. But in the waking hours, sleep still clung to the body like a second robe. The Han believed in qi, a vital energy that flowed through all things. Sleep replenished it, but improper rest could disrupt it. Scholars were especially vulnerable, since their qi was often tied up in the heart-mind. Thus, bedtime rituals were often framed around balance. One common practice was calm breathing, known as tuna, done before sleep, and again upon waking. The scholar would sit facing the east, breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 2, exhale slowly for 6. The goal was not meditation in the modern sense, but alignment, to let the body return to stillness so the mind could do the same. Diet, too, played its part. Zhang Ren often avoided meat at night, preferring boiled millet, pickled radish, or lotus seed paste. Heavy food was believed to cloud the dreams, weighing down the heart and muddying the symbolic language of the sleeping mind. Cold water was avoided, warm tea preferred. A slice of ginger might be chewed before bed to warm the stomach spirit. And then there were the amulets. Though a man of books, Zhang Ren was not above hanging a simple charm at the base of his lamp, a small jade disc with a hole in the center, tied with faded red silk. It was not valuable. It had no inscription, but it had belonged to his father, who once told him it kept the heavy dreams away. In the scholar's tradition, ancestral memory lived in these objects, not as ghosts or spirits, but as weight, quiet reminders that knowledge was inherited, and that even in sleep, one's thoughts were shaped by generations long past. In some more traditional households, families would offer paper talismans to the household deity before sleep. These were burned, and the ashes placed in a small clay bowl beneath the bed. The fire was thought to carry intentions upward, like letters to the clouds. Zhang Ren's household was more austere, but on certain nights, especially just before the summer rains, he allowed his servant to light a single cone of sandalwood incense and place it beneath the platform. The smoke would rise slowly, curling like brushstrokes beneath the mat, and in this way, the air itself was composed, just as a poem was. But what of the scholar's bed? It remained firm, cool, and bare. Sheets were uncommon. Instead, he slept atop the woven mat with a thin linen covering, folded precisely each morning and aired in the courtyard sun. He had no down blanket, no silk canopy. His room was not large, but it was correct. each object in balance with the others. And when the sleep came, it came not as a surrender, but as a shift. The Han scholar did not fall into sleep. He entered it. As a man enters a library, as a man lowers his brush to a blank page. In dreams, sometimes he returned to the lecture hall of his youth, where the great scholar Libo had once spoken of the three obscurities, the idea that thought, memory, and sleep were all connected, but never simultaneously clear. The dream of Libo always ended the same way, with the teacher's brush breaking mid-character, and no one knowing what to write next. Zhang Ren would wake, unsettled but not alarmed, because not knowing was part of learning, and waking with questions was better than sleeping through answers. One morning, after such a dream, he stood by the window and looked at the sky before light. It was pale grey, not yet morning, not yet night. He picked up his stylus and added to the dream book, "I dreamed of forgetting, but in the dream, I felt free." He did not interpret it. He did not need to, because in the scholar's world, not all dreams are lessons. Some are punctuation, some are breath, some are quiet ink spilled across a page you will never read. Still, it leaves one wondering, if a dream is not meant to teach, but only to be remembered, how do we know which dreams were truly our own? By the time autumn arrived in Luoyang, the leaves on the scholar's courtyard tree had turned the colour of old bronze. The city slowed with the changing season, less laughter in the alleyways, fewer market stalls shouting beneath red awnings. The heat was gone, replaced by a gentler chill that crept in at dusk and lingered through dawn. For Zhang Ren, now entering the later years of his life, sleep had become his most consistent companion, but it was different now. Not heavier, nor longer, just quieter. In the prime of his career, Zhang Ren had filled his nights with thoughts unfinished, scrolls reopened, the delicate scraping of brush against bamboo. But now, as his joints stiffened and his sight dimmed slightly, he let go of those habits. He no longer reached for the inkstone in the night, no longer rose to record every fleeting image from sleep. Instead, he began to listen more. Each evening, after his servant lit the oil lamp and placed a small bowl of steamed pear beside his sleeping mat, Zhang Ren would sit for a long time, doing nothing, not reciting, not reading, simply allowing the day to empty out. Some nights, he would whisper his favourite passage from the Book of Rites. Let the ripples return to silence. And then he would lie down. The wooden pillow no longer felt strange, its firmness comforted him. His body remembered the curve of it. He folded his hands over his chest, then placed them at his sides, both equally acceptable postures, depending on which school of etiquette you asked. His breaths were long, unforced. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and aged paper. In these later years, Zhang Ren began having one recurring dream. In it he was walking along the edge of a river, not the Luo River of Luoyang, but something wider and slower, with mist hovering just above the surface. Across the water stood figures, indistinct but calm, their outlines blurred as if drawn by a sleepy hand. One of them sometimes raised an arm, another sometimes turned away. He never crossed, never called out, and then he would wake, not startled, not disturbed, just returned. He never wrote this dream in the bamboo book, not because it frightened him, but because he did not need to name it. The image stayed with him, steady and mild, like the slow-moving clouds above the scholar's garden. By this point in his life, his scroll rack held more finished texts than open ones. The brush that had once danced across hundreds of pages now rested more often in its holder. But there was peace in this slowing. In Han philosophy, the end of life was not seen as a break, but as a continuation, a folding of the scroll, a period at the end of a long, careful paragraph. And so it was with Zhang Ren. His sleep became a rehearsal for departure, not in fear, but in calm repetition. His servant, younger by 3 decades, and far less patient, once asked him if he feared the dreams he could not interpret. Zhang Ren shook his head. "Some dreams are not for us to understand," he said, "only to carry." The autumn deepened. He added another blanket to his bed. The tea changed from chrysanthemum to ginger. He began going to bed earlier, not from fatigue, but because the dusk felt longer now, as if it wanted more of him. And then, one evening, without ceremony, he simply did not wake. His servant found him the next morning, hands resting neatly at his sides, his pillow undisturbed. The oil lamp had burned out. The sandalwood had turned to ash. On his small writing table was a final note, not written in haste, nor with trembling hand. Just a single line carved into bamboo, a dream that asks no questions. Perhaps that is the answer. His scrolls were bundled and sent to the local library. His room was not preserved, but simply cleaned. The bamboo mat was aired, the oil lamp refilled, and the bed, hard and honest, remained where it was. Another scholar would come, another sandal would rest beside the platform, another bowl of pear would steam beside the lamp, and so the grammar of sleep continued. For sleep, in the scholar's world, was not just the absence of thought, it was its softest form, its quietest ink, its final, unread scroll. And as we step out of Zhang Ren's room, out into the soft hush of morning and the smell of winter bark, we might still wonder if the greatest thoughts are those we cannot remember. Do our dreams know more than we do? Hear the distant thump of sandals on mosaic floors, the clink of bronze cups being collected from a nearby triclinium, and the murmur of sleepy conversation behind drawn curtains. You are in a Roman villa, somewhere along the coast near Ostia perhaps, or just outside the Palatine Hill, where the sky is fading into deep indigo, and the sea breeze carries with it the smell of olive oil, charcoal, and fading perfume. In one of the villa's upper chambers, a servant named Gaius moves barefoot across the floor, carrying a small bronze oil lamp in his right hand and a damp cloth in his left. He is 19, freckled and quiet, trained not to speak unless spoken to. His task, to prepare the master's sleeping room. To serve in a Roman noble household was not only to labour, it was to disappear into the details, and nowhere was this more evident than at bedtime. The patrician class of Rome, the senatorial elites, the landowning aristocrats, regarded sleep not only as a bodily need, but as a symbolic act. It was the final statement of the day, the restoration of the body, after the demands of rhetoric, politics, and indulgence. The bedchamber itself, or cubiculum, was not always large, but it was significant. In some villas, it sat at the heart of a private wing, shielded by painted panels and guarded by quiet-footed attendants. Inside, the air was already cooling. Terracotta braziers had been lit at dusk, releasing a slow warmth scented faintly with pine resin and dried citrus peel. The walls were frescoed with quiet scenes, nymphs bathing, ivy curling around columns, Mercury slipping through clouds. The ceiling was flat, painted in dark blue with stars that only glowed faintly by lamplight. Gaius moved carefully through the room, straightening the linen bed cover, placing a small bronze mirror on the bedside table, and unwrapping a fresh strip of cloth, soaked in rosewater, to be folded over the sleeping mat. This was not for comfort. It was for scent. The master preferred to fall asleep with the smell of flowers, or rather, with the memory of them. The bed itself was made of curved wood, elevated on carved legs. There were no pillows as we know them, only headrests filled with feathers or fine wool, wrapped in soft-dyed linen. Sleep posture was important. Left side for digestion, slightly reclined to aid breathing, arms folded in a way that preserved the day's grooming. Hair was to remain untouched. Oils applied during the bath earlier in the evening had to set. Roman sleep for the elite was performed. Before sleep came the lectus, the bed ritual. The master might read from a scroll, or more often, have it read to him. Gaius would stand at the edge of the room, reading in a low voice from Ovid or Cicero, his Latin flowing gently, like water over pebbles. The words were not necessarily meant to be heard in full. They were meant to soothe, to remind the master of control, of culture, of his place in the long line of educated men who spoke by lamplight before surrendering to dreams. Once the scroll was closed, the lamp was dimmed, but the room was not yet quiet. A small bronze spoon, slightly bent, was brought forward. It was the master's preferred tool for tasting the poppy milk that Gaius prepared each night. This mixture of milk, honey, and crushed poppy seed was both a treat and a sedative. Consumed from a shallow dish with ceremony, Gaius would warm it over the brazier, stirring with the spoon until steam rose, then kneel and present it without a word. The master would sip slowly, always slowly, and while he did, Gaius placed a charm under the bed. Not a religious item, officially. Not from the household altar, just a small smooth stone tied with leather, marked with a scratch in the shape of a laurel leaf. Superstition, yes, but widely tolerated. Rome, for all its gods, still left space for shadows. In truth, many elite Romans feared dreams. To them, dreams were unpredictable. Visits from gods or ghosts, symbols from Jupiter or Mercury, or the restless dead. Some dreams were welcomed, others feared. That's why many nobles, including Gaius's master, kept a dream interpreter among their household staff or consulted one in the forum. There were entire scrolls devoted to dream signs: snakes, birds, teeth falling out, drowning, flying, eating figs, hearing thunder. Each came with its own caution or command. Some nights, the master asked Gaius to leave a stylus and wax tablet at his bedside, ready, in case he woke with a vision that needed recording. It was believed that writing a dream immediately gave one control over it, robbing it of its power. But control was an illusion. Sleep came when it wished, and when it did, Gaius would retreat, silent, barefoot, carrying the empty spoon and the flickering lamp through the hallway, back toward the servant quarters. His duties were not done. He still had to polish sandals, wash the milk dish, and perhaps assist his mistress if she called for her veil to be adjusted. In the meantime, behind the silk curtain of the cubiculum, the master shifted once beneath the linen sheet, turned toward the wall fresco, and closed his eyes. Outside, a dog barked in the courtyard. A fig fell from a tree with a quiet thud, and another Roman night began to fold itself over the tiled roofs of the sleeping elite. But one wonders if the masters dreamed of power, and the servants dreamed of freedom, whose sleep was truly deeper. Behind its marble columns and shuttered windows, the master slept in the scent of honey and poppy milk. His breathing was slow, his posture preserved, left side curled just so, embroidered hem of the linen sheet, folded precisely over one shoulder. The lamp had been extinguished, and in its place, shadows lay across the frescoed walls like folds in a forgotten toga. But not everyone slept. In the narrow back wing of the villa, where the paint on the walls had long since chipped, and the tiles were plain and unpolished, Gaius sat upright on a wooden bench. He was not permitted a real bed, not yet. His sleep would come in intervals, 20 minutes here, perhaps an hour there, always light, never deep. He shared this room with two others, Dharma, who handled the master's sandals and grooming oils, and Syra, who served the mistress and slept with a cloth-wrapped candle near her cheek, waiting for the moment she might be summoned. Their room had no frescoes, no breeze, just a dry oil lamp, a chipped amphora of stale water, and the soft smell of worn leather and old bread. Sleep for Roman servants was conditional, not only upon the whims of the master, but on timing, temperature, rank. Gaius, as a body servant, was considered of high enough status to sleep indoors. Others, those who worked in the kitchens or tended livestock, often slept in doorways, stables, or beneath benches in the atrium. If it rained, they moved closer to the hearth. If it was cold, they wrapped themselves in scraps of old cloaks, or pressed against the warm tiles near the bath's furnace room. The average servant in a Roman elite household might sleep in 3 or 4 hour chunks, interrupted by bells, footsteps, or the sound of the master knocking the spoon against a dish, because the master's sleep, though deeply protected, was also deeply fragile. Roman elites, despite their status, often harbored great fear of what the night might bring. It was not the dark itself that worried them, but what stirred beneath it. The larvae, for instance, restless spirits believed to walk among the living, particularly if burial rites were incomplete or improper. To ward them off, some nobles kept a lararium, a small household altar, within sight of their bed. Others placed salt at the thresholds of their sleeping rooms, or tucked small bones of sacrificed birds into their headrests. Gaius had once seen the master sleep with a bronze coin pressed into his palm, wrapped in a silk ribbon. He never asked why, but he later found a scroll in the household library listing rituals for warding off the dead who speak. One of the methods included the coin, a token, it said, to bind the soul to silence. Sometimes, the master would wake screaming, not loudly, not wildly, but with a gasp, a clutch of the chest, a sharp intake of breath. He would call for Gaius, who would arrive within seconds, silent and barefoot. No questions, just presence. A cool cloth, a whisper of water poured from a clay jug, a brief rubbing of the temples with oil of myrrh, and then, usually the master would say it aloud. The dream, once, he said, I was chased by my father, and his face was my own. Thus another time, I was in the Senate, but no one heard me. Gaius never replied. He only handed over the wax tablet and the stylus. The master's hand, shaking slightly, would scribble until the vision emptied from his mind, and then he'd return to sleep. But Gaius didn't. He would remain seated on the stone bench outside the cubiculum, eyes closed but mind awake, because Roman servant life trained the body not just to obey, but to wait. There were rituals even among the serving class, small private habits to make sleep bearable. Gaius had one, a splintered wooden charm he kept tied beneath his tunic, carved roughly with the image of Mercury. He rubbed it 3 times before lying down, thinking not of gods or omens, but simply of his mother's garden back in Campania, a place with dirt floors and lemon trees, and no marble in sight. Some nights, Syra, who rarely spoke, would hum to herself while lying on the floor mat. Not a melody, but a single note drone. Gaius once asked her why. She replied, "So I don't hear my thoughts." By the second hour of the night, most servants, if not summoned, would doze lightly. Sleep did not restore them, it maintained them. It kept their minds thin enough to remain alert, but thick enough not to shatter. Still, they dreamed. Gaius dreamed of scrolls, long, endless scrolls, with no words, just lines. Sometimes he dreamed of opening a door that led to another villa, and another, each more silent than the last. He never dreamed of freedom, because freedom had not been imagined yet. Not truly. But what made the servant's night end wasn't always the master's summons. It was the morning bell, a dull chime rung by the steward, signalling the start of the villa's daily routines, before dawn, before rest, before thought could finish its own sentence. Gaius would rise, splash cold water on his face, adjust his tunic, and walk quietly toward the master's chamber, lamp in hand. He would wake the master not with sound, but with presence, and the master, still soft with sleep, would murmur, "Did I speak last night?" And Gaius, with quiet eyes and a tone smooth as oil, would say, "No, Dominus." All was silent, even when it wasn't. But that leads us to wonder if silence must be invented to preserve dignity, whose dreams are ever truly honest. The lamps were being lit in the atrium. It was still early, perhaps the 6th hour of the night, but the steward had already begun his rounds, checking the braziers, nodding at the kitchen slaves, inspecting the temple alcove by the garden. The moon had shifted toward the western horizon, casting a blue-grey light over the roof tiles and fig trees. Inside the villa, silence remained, but it was no longer the silence of sleep. It was the silence before return. In the cubiculum, the master stirred. Gaius, who had been seated on a small wooden stool outside the curtain for the last hour, rose without a word. He had been listening for the rhythm of breath to change, one of many subtle signals a servant learned to recognize. The shallow breath meant rest, the deeper sigh, that meant waking. He slipped into the room like a shadow. The air was cool and heavy with the fading scent of poppy milk and beeswax. The linen sheet had shifted slightly. Gaius smoothed it. The wax tablet had not been used. A good sign, perhaps, or maybe the master had dreamed and simply chosen not to remember. In elite Roman culture, not all dreams were to be spoken. Some, it was believed, were gifts from Somnus, the god of sleep, who shared his quiet realm with the underworld. Others came from Morpheus, who shaped images from the souls of the departed. and some best left unspoken, came from Phantasos, the god of dream deception, who delighted in illusions. When a Roman noble dreamed of failure, betrayal, or poverty, he often kept it to himself, not out of modesty, but out of superstition. To speak a dream aloud might give it form, power, legs, to walk into the waking world. So the master said nothing. He accepted the mourning cloth Gaius offered, a strip of damp linen scented faintly with vinegar and thyme, and wiped his eyes, his neck, the base of his throat. The poppy milk had dried at the corners of his mouth. Gaius offered a bronze cup of water. The master drank slowly, staring not at his servant, but at the fresco on the far wall, a painted Persephone, half vanished in the shadows of the underworld. Was she waking or retreating? He did not say. Instead, he murmured, "Was it cold last night?" Gaius replied simply, "A little, Dominus." The brazier held. This was not conversation, it was choreography. The day's performance was beginning again. Soon the master would be bathed, robed, and escorted to the morning meal. His guests would arrive. He would discuss Senate affairs, dictate letters, and walk among his gardens as if the night had never happened. But Gaius would remember it. Every motion, every silence, every word not spoken. Servants, though rarely educated formally, were memory keepers. They watched what the masters tried to forget. They folded bedsheets still warm with fear. They cleaned spoons still sticky with sedative. They carried dreams not their own. And when the night returned, they did it all again. Because rest, in Roman elite households, was not a private act. It was a stage. The cubiculum was a theatre of performance, and the servant, its quiet prompter behind the curtain. Later that morning, Gaius walked past the lararium, the household shrine. A fresh offering had been placed on the stone platform. A fig, a splash of wine, and a folded scrap of cloth tied with red thread. Sarah whispered that the mistress had woken from a troubling dream, one she would not describe. The offering, she said, was meant to bind the tongue of the dead. Gaius said nothing, just nodded. He had heard the mistress cry out sometime during the third hour, just once. A short, startled noise, like a dropped plate, or a bird striking glass. The dream would not be written down. The priest would not be called, and by noon it would be forgotten. That was the way of the villa. But the servants would remember, because while the patricians dreamed of omens, prophecy, and power, the servants dreamed of quiet, of no more lamps to trim, of sandals they would never polish again, of a bed, just once, not shared with duty, and when sleep came to them, it was not sweet, it was efficient, like a page turned in someone else's book. So as the sun crept through the archways of the villa, and the sound of morning footsteps returned, one might wonder, if all sleep is unequal, yet all dreams are personal, then whose night holds more truth, the one recorded in wax, or the one remembered in silence? It is a summer evening in Bengal, sometime in the 1870s. The horizon is purple with heat. The pond in the centre of the courtyard still glimmers faintly in the dusk light, its edges crowded with frogs, floating lotus leaves, and the occasional bobbing oil lamp drifting away from a careless servant's hands. Crickets begin their nightly chorus, and somewhere beyond the compound walls, a bullock cart rolls slowly along the dusty village road. But within the Zamindar Bari, the sprawling mansion of a Bengali landowning family, the preparations for night have already begun. Let us begin at the edge of the courtyard, under the mango tree, where a servant boy named Haran climbs barefoot along the low roof beam to untie the cloth screen. The screen, woven from coarse Casca's grass and soaked earlier in rosewater, will be drawn across the open veranda to cool the air as it dries. This is his third such screen today. His knees are scratched, his fingers are sticky from mango sap, but he moves quickly, quietly, with the practiced rhythm of someone who knows better than to linger in the noble family's sleeping wing once the sun has set. Because here, in this world of slow ritual and whispered commands, sleep is not an afterthought. It is a structured descent into stillness, shaped by caste, climate, superstition, and status. Inside the Thakadalan, The family's ancestral hall turns sleeping veranda during summer. Bedrolls are being arranged. Not beds in the Western sense, but thick cotton gadders laid over the red oxide floor, aligned precisely with the breeze. Each roll is paired with a wooden pillow block, carved to cradle the neck, and a mosquito net suspended from bamboo poles above. The family's matriarch, Thakumar, will sleep on a low charpai, a woven rope cot, with a large brass bell placed beneath. If she needs anything in the night, she'll strike it once, and someone, usually Haran, will come running. But until then, she lies fanning herself with a palm leaf fan, murmuring half-remembered couplets from the Ramayana, while her granddaughter oils her feet with coconut balm. To the side, the eldest son, Babu Moshai, slowly undoes his Angrika tunic, folding it neatly beside a copy of Iswar Chandra Vidyasagar's essays, which he was pretending to read. He does not sleep indoors in the summer. That would be stifling. Instead, he lies under the mosquito net with a clay water pot by his side, a brass spittoon nearby, and his old Sanskrit verses echoing faintly in his head as sleep draws near. But sleep is not private in the Zamindar house. It is communal. Family members, servants, guests, even favoured pigeons in cages above the veranda, all breathe the same heavy air, under the same fluttering nets, among the same smells: turmeric, dust, jasmine, sweat, coconut oil, and ink. The night is not silent. It rustles, hums, breathes, and the rituals of sleep unfold in layers. The younger daughter, Kumudini, recites from memory her 12 verses of Tagore, not yet famous, but already shared among zamindari households with poetic ambition. Her boomer sister-in-law braids her long hair tightly before pinning it with sandalwood oil and wrapping it in a thin white muslin scarf to keep it from tangling in the humid wind. The eldest servant woman, Ganga Didi, sprinkles turmeric water at the four corners of the veranda to keep the evil eyes out, she says, more to herself than to anyone else. Her back is bent, but her hands still remember the patterns. Even the sleeping mats are placed facing a certain direction, heads toward the east, feet never toward the family shrine. Sleep, in this home, follows the sun, even in its absence. And just before the final lamp is dimmed, the Kulo winnowing fan is propped up by the entrance, an old trick to ward off snakes who might slither in through the open veranda. It makes no sound, but it has stood guard for generations. And what of the dreams? In this world, dreams matter. Every morning, Takuma asks the household, Keiki shop no deketcho, who saw what in their dreams? A black cow? Auspicious? A cracked bangle? A warning? A distant flute? Someone will come bearing news. Kumodini once dreamed of a snake coiled at the foot of her bed. The next day, a letter arrived from her cousin, announcing a difficult birth. No one was surprised. But because dreams were taken so seriously, many precautions were woven into sleep. A thread of red and black tied around children's wrists, a bronze amulet placed beneath the sleeping mat. Sechant, whispered 3 times by Ganga Didi to shut the ear to the wrong voice. And, so the night deepens, the panka ceiling fan stops. Kiran has finally fallen asleep at the end of his rope pull. The oil lamps have burned low, casting soft halos on the terracotta floor. A gecko chirps above the picture of Rani Rashmoni, and one by one, the breaths of the sleeping household merge into something calm and slow, and centuries old. But in the stillness of the hour, you might begin to wonder, if everyone shares the same air, the same shadows, the same mosquito-bitten dreams, then whose sleep belongs to whom? Midnight does not arrive in this household like a bell. It drifts in, unnoticed, just as the oil lamps finally gutter, and the last human voice fades into the cotton-thick night. But the Zamindar's house does not truly sleep. It simply lowers its voice. There is always something that breathes, or shifts, or stirs. A night breeze rustling the jackfruit leaves, a pot rolling slightly on the uneven floor, the low cough of a cook's boy turning on his side in the outer kitchen shed. A pigeon flaps once in its cage, then returns to stillness, and in the women's sleeping veranda, where the matriarch's brass bell remains untouched under her charpai, Kumudini wakes. Not fully, just enough. She adjusts the edge of her mosquito net, disturbed by the faint tickle of something, probably nothing, against her ankle. In the dark, the shape of the house rearranges itself, the shadows stretch longer, the walls recede into memory, and the ceiling fan's rope swings slightly in the breeze, though Haran no longer pulls it. This is the waking between sleeps, common in Bengal's humid nights. Not insomnia, but a middle passage, part of the natural rhythm when the body, overheated or interrupted by dreams, stirs softly before returning to rest. Kumudini lies awake for a few minutes, listening. She hears the sigh of her boomer, restless beneath her net. She hears the soft splash of a frog in the courtyard basin. She smells burnt mustard oil. Someone forgot to clean the lamp wick. And faintly, from the far courtyard, she hears a conch shell. Not loud, not ceremonial, just a soft, brief chuan, a sound some believe calms unsettled spirits, or at least signals to the wind that someone is awake, alert. It is likely Ganga Didi. She often walks during the night, her soft feet padded with wet cloth to stay cool. She believes that if she walks a full circle around the inner courtyard each night, once clockwise, once counterclockwise, no new quarrel will begin in the family the next day. No one questions her. In households like this, the line between duty and superstition has long been erased. Back in the men's sleeping wing, Babu Moshai has also stirred. He doesn't call for water, doesn't ring the bell, but his fingers fumble briefly for the clay cup beside his net. He drinks. The water is warm, slightly metallic. He sits up, resting his elbows on his knees, the outline of his upper body flickering against the cloth panels. His thoughts wander to the estate accounts, to a poem he meant to finish, to a letter from Calcutta he hasn't answered. But mostly, he thinks of the dream he can't quite remember, something about a banyan tree. He lies back down. In the servants' quarters, Haran dreams without waking. He is still too young for broken sleep. In his dream, he is back in his natal village, fishing from the pond, laughing at something a boy is saying, but the boy's face is blurred. The net in his hand is full of water, but no fish, and he is not sad about it. Sometimes, the dreams of the young in Zamindar households are the gentlest, because they are not yet dreams of inheritance, reputation, or unspoken grief. They are dreams of movement, of running barefoot, of escaping the weight of brass dishes and ceiling ropes. Elsewhere in the house, two married women lie back to back, their breath synchronized. One dreams of her deceased mother, the other dreams of cooking for a crowd and dropping the salt. The line between dream and waking has thinned, but still, no bell has rung. The brass bell beneath the matriarch's cot remains still, though her eyes are now open. She does not call anyone. She simply lies, eyes adjusting to the dark, watching the way the air moves the mosquito net like a second breath. Her mind recites his shlokas silently, ones her grandmother taught her when she was a child bride, shivering in the first house she ever came to as a stranger. She has slept in this house for over 60 years. She knows every crack in the ceiling plaster, every chime of the wind through the cracked glass above the door, and in this moment she remembers a time when the family slept on mud floors, before they were zamindars, before the East India Company sent surveyors to draw borders around the pond, the jackfruit tree, the worn stone at the edge of the shrine. And now her granddaughters sleep beside her, and the moonlight, slivered and thin, still finds its way into the courtyard. By the time the first rooster calls, the house has returned to deeper stillness, not total sleep, just the lowered collective exhale that marks the final watch of night. Soon the household will wake, tea will be boiled over wood fire, the banyan leaves will be swept from the steps, the bell will ring for the first offering at the Tulsi shrine, and someone will ask, as always, who dreamed what last night? But how does one explain the dreams that come and go like moths? The ones you only remember in the curve of your sleeping mat, in the sweat behind your knees, in the moment your name is spoken gently, and not by anyone in the room. So one begins to wonder if the night remembers us more than we remember it, Where do our dreams go once the fan starts turning again? By the time the eastern sky turns pale as coconut milk, the first movements begin, soft, habitual, and deeply rehearsed. The matriarch stirs first. As always, her right hand reaches for the brass bell beneath her charpar, but she does not ring it. She merely touches it, a confirmation that the world still moves as it should. She stretches her legs slowly, her joints stiff from age and humidity, and breathes in the faint scent of sandalwood ashes left behind by the mosquito coil. Beside her, folded with the carefulness of a sacred book, is her sleeping shawl, worn thin over decades and embroidered with fading red thread that her mother-in-law had sewn in her girlhood. No alarm sounds. The morning does not arrive loudly in the zamindar house. It seeps in. The faint metallic clang of a ladle on a clay water pot, the swish of a broom made of palm fronds sweeping last night's dust from the veranda, a cough, a yawn, the creak of a charpai frame as someone adjusts their posture, and then the murmured call from the inner courtyard. Thakuma, Joe Leo. Tatiti, grandmother, would you like water? It is Haran, blinking sleep from his eyes, as he carries a brass lota of water in both hands, careful not to spill. His tunic is still crumpled from his restless nap in the servant's wing, but his movements are precise. Thakuma nods, drinks in 3 slow sips. Water is never gulped in the morning. It is respected, like breath. Elsewhere the house returns to itself. The sleeping mats are rolled up. The nets are untied from their bamboo hooks and folded like sails. The charpers are carried back to the inner verandas, where the light is softer, and the early breeze can reach through the cracks in the slatted shutters. The oil lamps are cleaned, ashes tapped into a copper tray, glass chimneys wiped with the edge of an old gamcha. And now begins the most subtle of morning rituals, the dream-telling, not dramatic, not confessional, just the passing around of nocturnal fragments. Kumudini sits cross-legged, combing her hair with a wide-toothed horn comb, and says, almost as if to herself, I was walking down to the riverbank. The sky was red. I had no shoes. Her boomer, still half asleep, replies, That'n, someone must be coming today. Check the path. At the edge of the courtyard, Ganga Didi listens. She does not speak of her own dream. She never does, but she glances toward the tulsi plant, which has dropped more leaves than usual. She begins to hum under her breath, and moves to sprinkle turmeric water around its base, just in case. Dreams, in this household, do not need interpretation, only witnessing. In her own way, Takuma keeps a kind of dream ledger, not written down, not spoken aloud, but remembered, catalogued by gesture, by expression, by the tone in someone's voice when they stir their tea or fold their shawl. She notices which granddaughter sighs twice before breakfast, which servant boy avoids eye contact, which tray is dropped on the threshold. She notices these things because sleep in this house is not just rest. It is a message sent in silence, through scent and position and rhythm, and the house remembers. A century ago, this very courtyard held a different family. Their dreams are long gone, but the same jackfruit tree grows, the same steps creak, the same breeze rattles the clay tiles above the Thakurdalan. Even the pigeon cages are still there, though fewer pigeons remain. Babu Moshe emerges from his room, adjusting his duty, scratching his chest absently. He doesn't mention the dream he had, of falling through a field of ink, of voices calling his childhood name. Instead, he says, was it cool last night? I didn't wake once. Pabaran, sweeping mango leaves from the courtyard tiles, replies, Zitwa, the breeze came from the south. That is enough, because the night has passed, and in a zamindar household, that alone is a kind of triumph. The water is set to boil, the rice is rinsed. The bell will soon ring for morning prayer, but somewhere caught between the folded mats and the scent of coconut oil, last night's dreams linger. They hang in the air like fading mist, not fully gone, not fully understood, only carried, quietly, into the day. And so we might wonder if no one ever writes these dreams down, but everyone remembers their shape, Do they belong to the family or to the house itself? The gaslight flickers. The kettle hisses, not quite boiling, and the long, narrow hallway of the boarding house breathes out the final sigh of another spent London day. You are in Camden Town, circa 1883. Outside, the soot-covered city is settling under the damp quilt of night. Horse hooves splash through the gutters. The last of the lamplighters move on to the alley behind the butcher's shop, and a distant bell marks 9 o'clock. But here, on the second floor of Mrs. Hale's respectable boarding house for women of modest income and good character, sleep is not yet near. Not because it is unwelcome, but because it is rationed. Let us step into room No. 4, where Miss Margaret Elkins, a 27-year-old typesetter's assistant, with ink beneath her fingernails and a coat patched twice at the elbow, is beginning her nightly routine. The room is barely large enough to contain a single bed, a wash basin, a cracked wardrobe, and a small table with a sloping drawer. The wallpaper is yellowed and peeling slightly at the seams, but someone has pasted up a print of Queen Victoria beside a fading verse clipped from a temperance pamphlet. It is neither cosy nor unkind. It is simply what she can afford. Margaret folds her shawl, grey wool, thin from winters past, placing it across the end of her cot. She removes her boots, checking the sole of the left one where it leaks during rain. She sits for a moment at the foot of the bed, rubbing her temples with thumb and forefinger. Her lamp hisses faintly. The wick is low. She doesn't want to use another. There's still some warmth in the stove from earlier. It ticks as it cools. That ticking, barely louder than a whisper, is what tells Margaret it's almost time to lie down. For boarders like her, time is not kept with clocks. It is kept in sound. The stove cooling in the wall between her room and Miss Pringle's, tease. The bed frame creaking above, where Mrs. Hale's nephew tosses and turns in his sleep. The soft thump of slippers on the stair, someone going to the shared lavatory down the hall, and always the steady pulse of a city that never entirely sleeps. The sleep in a Victorian boarding house is a shared affair, not in beds, but in breath, in caution, in the mutual decision to pretend not to hear one another's dreams. Before settling in, Margaret performs her last ritual, checking the window latch 3 times, once for safety, once for certainty, and once because her mother always did the same. Then she removes the copy of David Copperfield tucked under her pillow, not to read it, but to hold it, to feel the weight of the story, the binding, the certainty that something in it ends better than the day she's just had. The bed is narrow. The mattress, stuffed with horsehair, has a slight dip in the middle. She lies on her right side, always the right, facing the wall, one hand tucked beneath the pillow, the other resting on the copy of the book. The light is snuffed, and now we enter the heart of a Victorian night. Not the one painted in oil with carriages and gentlemen's clubs, but the working woman's night, a sleep measured in inches, in interruptions, in borrowed warmth. Below her room, the landlady washes teacups in a tin basin. Above, someone coughs. Far off, the baker's cart rattles late down the cobbles, carrying leftover loaves back to the alley for sale in the morning. The scent of coal dust lingers in the air, tangled with starch and ink. And then come the dreams. Margaret dreams of letters, falling, like snow, around her feet. Some are blank, some carry her name, in the hand of someone she hasn't seen in years. The dream does not frighten her, but she wakes from it with a tear running down her cheek, not for what the letter said, but because she never opened it. She will not write it down. There is no dream journal here, no interpreter, just the hush of knowing you cannot always afford to remember. But she does sit up, reaches again for the window latch, listens. Somewhere in the distance, a train groans to a halt near Euston. A baby cries through a thin wall, its mother's shushing soft and apologetic. The boarding house exhales again, and so Margaret lies down once more. She pulls the shawl over her shoulders. Though it slips in the night, she closes her eyes, knowing the dawn will come before she is ready. The alarm will not be a clock, but the murmur of boiling kettles and the heavy bootfall of lodgers rushing out to chase the day. And yet, this hour is hers. This 1 hour, perhaps 2 if she's lucky, when no one asks anything of her, not even herself. In that silence you may wonder, if rest is measured not in hours but in how much you can forget, then how many minutes of peace make a full night's sleep? It is well past midnight. Not that Margaret Elkins can know the time exactly. She owns no watch. Her neighbour Miss Pringle's wall clock broke last Easter and never chimed again, and the gas light in the hallway burned out last week and has yet to be replaced. Time here is known only by rhythm. The stove's warmth has completely faded. The silence is no longer silence. It is hollow, the kind of deep night when even London lowers its voice. The fog has settled over Camden Town like a woolen shroud. The occasional rattle of carriage wheels on the cobbled street outside is the only proof that the world still turns. Margaret lies still beneath her patched blanket, not quite asleep, not quite awake. This middle space is familiar to her. It is where worries curl around the brain like pipe smoke. Rent, ink stains, a cousin she hasn't written to, the newest girl at the print shop who works faster than she should, the memory of a song she once heard, played on a cracked piano in the back of a tea shop, the tune now impossible to summon, but its sadness still clear. It's in this space, the quarter world between waking and dreams, that the creaks and murmurs of the house take shape. Someone above has begun to snore. A man, likely, whose nostrils have whistled every night since June. A mouse rustles between the walls, possibly navigating the floorboards from the attic to the pantry. And faintly, through the window's broken seal, a foghorn groans somewhere far off near the Thames, thick and mournful, like a cello played under wool. In these hours, the boarding house becomes a choir of interruptions. Room No. 2's pipes tick. Room No. 6's door sways slightly in its frame. The lavatory door creaks open. Hinges protesting. Feet shuffle. A tap squeaks. Then, quiet again. This is not restlessness. It is simply the shape of night here. Margaret rolls over onto her back, staring into the blackness above. She cannot see the ceiling. Only imagine it. The water stains. The faint hairline crack, shaped like a crooked feather. Her fingers reach beneath her pillow and find the familiar weight of David Copperfield. She doesn't open it, just holds it. To many in this era, books are companions. For those who sleep alone in rented rooms, they are guardians. She thinks of the people who lived in this room before her, their breath in the same air, their elbows resting where hers now rest. Perhaps they too placed a book beneath the pillow, or tied their shawl around their feet. Perhaps they too stared into the dark and wondered when rest had become something measured, not felt. Some women here count the tiles on the ceiling when they can't sleep. Others pray. Miss Pringle hums hymns very softly. You can just barely hear her through the wall. It's always the same one. Abide with me. Slow and breathy. Margaret doesn't hum, doesn't pray much anymore. But she does remember. She remembers her father's workshop, the smell of varnish, the softness of sawdust underfoot. She remembers the bed she shared with her sister as a child. How they used to whisper nonsense words in the dark and try not to laugh. How her sister always turned toward the wall, and Margaret always toward the door. She still does, because part of her still waits for something to come through it. A letter, a knock, a chance, but none comes. Only the house's rhythm, the breath of old wood, the sigh of the stove cooling again, even though it hasn't been lit since supper. And now sleep comes, but in pieces, a 5-minute drift, a half dream of a field, a sudden return to wakefulness, heart beating faster than it should, then sleep again. This time, a heavier plunge, a dream of floating, not flying, just floating above the bed, looking down at herself, a strange comfort, no fear, just distance, until the cough. It cuts the night in half, like scissors through thread. Room No. 3. It's always room No. 3. An old woman, no one knows her name. She came last winter and never left. No visitors, no packages, just her and that cough, rasping up the stairs and into the hall like a train that never quite arrives. Margaret sighs. Not in annoyance, in recognition. We all have our noises, our burdens. Hers is simply louder. She turns again, pulling the shawl tighter over her chest. Her eyes drift. Her breath slows. The last thing she hears is the groan of the floorboard under the wardrobe, always that one, before the final quiet takes her. In boarding houses like this, sleep is not earned. It is endured, tended like a low fire, guarded against drafts and doubt. It is stitched together by will, soot, and repetition, and one begins to ask, if a life is lived in fractions of rooms, of wages, of rest, how much sleep must pass before it feels like it belongs to you? There is a moment just before the sky begins to pale, when the boarding house feels truly, completely still. It is not peace exactly. It is exhaustion, the kind that settles into the corners of the stairwell and presses gently on the shoulders of every boarder, still wrapped in half sleep. Outside, the world remains black and damp. The gas lights are dimmed. The coals in the kitchen stove have not yet been stirred. But the air is shifting. The city, like a great animal, is drawing breath. Inside room No. 4, Margaret Elkins opens her eyes, not because she's been fully woken, but because this is the hour she always wakes. Even when she hasn't truly slept, she does not rise yet. She lies there, eyes half open, listening. Her neck aches from the lump in the horsehair mattress. Her left foot is cold, the shawl having slipped again, but for a few precious minutes, she is allowed to lie still without expectation. The demands of the day, laundry, ink, rent, have not yet spoken. Somewhere in the distance, the first milk cart rattles through the alley. Its wooden wheels groan like an old man climbing stairs. The house begins its slow return. Mrs. Hale is already awake. You can tell by the sound of the kettle being filled. She hums to herself when she works in the kitchen, off-key and slow, a medley of lullabies and Methodist hymns. The water takes time to boil. It always does. The tap shivers in its pipe before releasing a trickle. A door creaks down the hall, slippers on the floorboards. Someone clears their throat. The sound of water in a basin, the thud of a chamber pot being emptied. Margaret closes her eyes again. She is not ready. Not yet. She tries to retreat back into sleep, into the floating dream from earlier, the one where she hovered above her own bed. She liked that dream. It had no urgency, just perspective, but it's gone now. As dreams always are once the building begins to stir. She turns her head. The copy of David Copperfield has slipped from beneath her pillow and now lies on the floor. She doesn't reach for it. The binding is cracked. The pages are soft at the edges from thumb and thumb and thumb again. She knows it by heart. Instead, she rises slowly. Her joints complain. Her arms feel heavier than they should. She pulls the shawl around her shoulders, tucks in one corner, and stands barefoot on the floorboards, worn smooth from years of tread. She runs a hand along the chipped edge of the wash basin and stares at herself in the oval mirror above it. The face she sees is not tired. It is practiced. She washes with cold water, no soap, just a quick splash, no time for anything else. Soon the others will crowd the hall. Soon the oven will be hot enough to burn the bread, and the boots in the downstairs rack will be sorted, and the street will be loud again with horses and shouting, but not yet. For a few moments longer, Margaret moves without witness. She opens the small window. A gull cries somewhere far above the rooftops. Fog presses against the glass like a memory, and through it she breathes. A deep breath, one that almost catches at the bottom of her ribs. Then she begins to fold the bed cover, not out of neatness, but out of ritual. In this house, everything has a rhythm. 3 folds in the blanket, 2 tugs on the pillow, dolsto, 1 prayer, not aloud but silent and uncertain, not even to God, just to the day, to its softness, if it has any. By the time the tea is poured downstairs, Margaret will have braided her hair, pulled on her patched boots, pressed a hand to the page of her book, not to read, but to feel its solidity, and when she steps into the corridor, past the smell of burnt toast and starch, past the other women in shawls and stockings, she will carry with her a sleep stitched from fragments, a patchwork of minutes, of half-dreams, of silence interrupted by the world. That will have to be enough, because in rooms like these, In years like these, sleep is not an escape, it is an act of endurance. And so we must ask ourselves, if a woman learns to live on borrowed time, borrowed wages, and borrowed dreams, what kind of sleep is she owed? The sky above Hawaii turns indigo, slowly, deliberately, like dye soaking into copper cloth. It is centuries before the arrival of Captain Cook. The land is sovereign, the sea is unchallenged, and atop a windswept plateau on the big island of Hawaii, beneath a canopy of breadfruit leaves and stars, a high-ranking alii, a chief of noble birth, prepares for sleep. This is not a simple act. This is a ceremony of stillness. Let us look now into the open-walled Hale Mo, the sleeping house. It is modest in size, its low frame lashed from curved ruhia wood and thatched with loahala leaves. But inside, the floor is layered with woven mats, mona, stacked in quiet reverence for the one who lies upon them. Beside the sleeping platform, a lava stone has been warmed in a fire pit, wrapped in copper and tucked near the feet to keep the body warm. On a small wooden tray, strips of roasted sweet potato and a carved gourd of water rest undisturbed. They are not for hunger, they are for comfort, for knowing that all needs are close. Outside, the night gathers. You hear the ocean, distant, constant, breathing in long, slow waves. You hear the wind brushing through the key plants, and the occasional rustle of a pig turning in its pen. And above all, you hear the chant, a single voice, low, gentle. A servant recites from memory a mele mo, a sleep chant, passed down through generations. It is not for the gods, it is for the chief. It lists names of ancestors, stories of the winds, warnings about dreams. It is a lullaby woven from lineage. In ancient Hawaiian belief, sleep was not merely rest, it was a passage. The spirit, Uhain, left the body during sleep, drifting to the Umakua, the ancestral spirits, or into the Po, the realm of night and gods. Sometimes the spirit wandered too far. Sometimes it brought back messages. That is why the chief's sleep was watched. A trusted attendant, known as a kahu moe, stayed nearby, not in the sleeping house itself, but just outside, within whispering distance. The kahu was trained to listen, to recognize the tone of the chief's breath, the stir of a troubled dream, or the whisper of a returning spirit. If the chief spoke aloud in sleep, the kahu remembered every word. At dawn, these fragments were shared with a priest, a kahuna, who interpreted them. Not all dreams were omens. Some were memories, but no dream from a chief was ignored. Tonight the chief lies on their side, draped in a fine cloak, a hola, woven with feathers of yellow room birds, and red ndi, ahiwi. It is not for warmth, it is for protection. It holds mana, the sacred energy of the bloodline, and sleep was a vulnerable time when mana could be weakened. The cloak stays through the night, the eyes close, and sleep comes not with silence, but with ceremony. A small bowl of coconut oil is placed at the head of the mat, blessed earlier with a chant invoking Laka, the spirit of rest and renewal. Its scent, earthy and faintly sweet, lingers in the air. The mats shift gently under the chief's weight, the rustle barely louder than the wind. The spirit is now adrift, and so begins the watching. The kahu sits cross-legged, just outside the howl, hands resting on knees, gaze unfixed. They are not allowed to sleep. Not until the 3rd hour past moonrise, not until the dreams have begun, and no signs of danger have stirred. Their ears stay open for the sounds of a dream, turning violent, a sharp breath, a sudden word, a hand gripping the mat. Because some dreams are warnings, some dreams are journeys, and some dreams are visits, from ancestors, from gods, from enemies. In rare cases, if the chief begins to cry out or thrash, the kahu does not enter. They blow softly through a hollow reed near the doorway, a sacred breath meant to guide the wandering Enhane back into the body. If that fails, they call the kahuna. A chant is spoken, a leaf is burned, a stone is rubbed over the chest to anchor the soul, but tonight is quiet. The chief breathes evenly. The cloak remains still. The lava stone has cooled, and somewhere in the trees above, a poel, A Hawaiian owl calls once, then disappears into the dark. A good sign. In many chants, the poeo is a guardian spirit, a symbol of safe travel between realms, so the kahu lets his shoulders lower, just slightly, just enough. He hums, not a chant now, just sound, a soft melody that remembers the wind, the canoe, the mountain, and as the stars shift over the hail mow, one cannot help but wonder if the spirit travels farther than the body. How do we know when we've truly come home? The moon has climbed higher now. Its pale light glances across the edge of the thatched hail, silvering the fronds of the tall nip palms that stand beyond the courtyard. The wind has calmed, resting with the land. The scent of charred kukui nut oil, burned in a small lamp earlier, still clings faintly in the air, and within the open-walled sleeping house, the chief stirs. Not with fear, but with motion that means meaning. The kahumo, still seated outside, tilts his head, his fingers pressed gently into his knees. He listens to the change in breath, in rustle, in tone. The dream has begun. For ancient Hawaiians, dreams were not metaphors. They were movements of spirit, of message, of warning. The body remained, but the uhane, the soul, journeyed, and where it went mattered. The chief's voice murmurs something unintelligible, not in speech, but in chant-like rhythm, a fragment, a cadence, something older than thought. The kahu does not speak. He does not enter, but he reaches slowly to his side, where a small bowl of water, gathered earlier from a sacred spring, waits. He dips a tie leaf in it, gently flicks a drop toward the entrance of the hail, a gesture of guidance, a gesture of return. He waits. This is not unusual. Many nights unfold this way. In high-ranking households, the nightly dream ritual was deeply woven into the rhythm of life. Some families kept dedicated dream interpreters, moehane kahuna, who specialized in navigating the maps of the sleeping soul. If a chief dreamed of ocean waves receding, it could signal a retreat from political conflict. If they dreamed of a fire that would not burn, it might warn of betrayal within the household. Each dream was story, and stories held manner. But not all dreams were ominous. Some were gifts. The chief may dream of standing on a canoe that does not rock, of speaking with a long-dead ancestor who offers no words, only presence. These dreams were not feared. They were held, remembered, sometimes reenacted at sunrise, when the kahuna arrived and the night was passed into record. No paper, no ink, just memory, chanted, preserved. Tonight, the kahu believes this is such a dream. The chief's expression softens. The feather cloak does not shift again. The murmurs fade into breath. He leans back slightly, careful not to rest against the post behind him, lest he lose focus. Sleep is not permitted during his watch. He is the bridge. Not long after, a second figure appears from the shadows beyond the sleeping platform. It is Walni, the elder priestess who oversees the kuau, the household shrine. She does not speak. Her steps make no sound on the dirt floor. She carries with her a thin reed mat, a bundle of kukui nuts, and a gourd of water scented with crushed niauli bark. She kneels beside the kahu, offering him a nod, then places the kukui bundle just outside the doorway of the sleeping house. This is a ritual known as puka ki, the placing of a symbolic offering to guide the soul homeward, should it wander too long or forget the path. She too listens, and slowly the night returns to stillness. Now as the third hour past moonrise arrives, the most sacred time of night begins. Known as Manawa Hayamo Lani, the sleeping hour of the heavens, this is when the barriers between Porb, the divine night realm, and the waking world are thinnest. It is during this time that the spirit may be taught, not instructed with words, but touched, nudged, recalibrated. The chief may wake remembering only a smell or a color, or the way a voice sounded without saying anything, and that will be enough. That will be meaning. But should the spirit not return, should the breath falter, the kahu is trained. A chant, passed down through generations, is spoken in a whisper. It begins with a call to Kana, god of creation, and ends with a plea to Hena, mother of the moon. asking her to shine light upon the soul's path. The chief breathes deeply, turns once beneath the cloak, still present, still whole. No chant is needed tonight. Eventually, Waheen retreats silently back toward the shrine. The Kahu remains. He rubs the reed mat between his fingers, feeling the small tears and ridges worn from years of use. His mind drifts to other nights, other dreams, other chiefs. He has been present at 6 deathbeds, but tonight is not one of them. Tonight, the land sleeps gently, the wind is still, the stones are warm beneath his feet, and the chief breathes like the ocean. India, out. India, out. India, out. He exhales once, and a small feather from the Ahula cloak drifts toward the edge of the mat, catching the faintest hint of moonlight as it settles. And you might wonder now, if a single feather holds centuries of lineage, what then does a dream carry? The stars begin to fade, not all at once but slowly, like embers cooling in the ashes of a sacred fire. It is still dark, but the darkness has changed. The Kahu notices first. He tilts his head slightly and watches as the southern horizon begins to lighten, not from the sun, not yet, but from the moon retreating behind the distant peaks of Mauna Loa. The time of deep sleep is over. Now begins the fragile interval before waking, the time when spirits return to their bodies, uncertain if they are welcome. Inside the Hail Moe, the chief has not stirred, but the breath is different now, more rooted, more earthly. The body twitches once, the toes shift beneath the edge of the woven mat. The cloak of feathers is undisturbed, but no longer still. The Kahu remains seated, hands on his knees, eyes on the entrance. He does not speak. He does not move. He watches. Waking a chief is not done with sound, not with touch. It is allowed to happen, and when it does, it is recorded. The first real sign comes with the blinking of the eyes, not startled, not confused, just aware. The chief opens his eyes to the ceiling of Lauhala leaves, painted now with the faintest suggestion of blue light, a slow breath, a stillness, and then the voice, quiet but deliberate. I saw my grandfather. He held a torch beneath the sea. The Kahu nods, never making eye contact. He replies, "Did he speak?" "No." But the torch did not go out. Another nod. Nothing is written down. Not yet. But the words will be remembered. Later in the morning, the kahuna will be summoned. The dream will be repeated in full, first to him, then to the elders of the court. A vision of a torch beneath the sea may signify truth beneath danger, a revelation hiding in a place where it should not survive. Or it may mean nothing, only memory shaped into symbols. But that is for the daylight to decide. For now the cloak is gently removed and folded by the Kahu, each motion deliberate, each fold aligned. The feathers are soft. Some are older than the chief himself, gathered by generations of Kuaina, the feather gatherers who walked the forests with nets and chants, taking only what was offered. The lava stone near the chief's feet is cold now. It is returned to the embers in the outer hearth, to be warmed again for the next night. A bowl of water is placed beside the chief, not to drink, but to dip fingers in, a symbolic washing of the Uhen, to remind it that the journey is done, that the body is whole, that it may rest once more within the chest without fear. This ritual, known as Hotaiku Hane, the return of the soul, is as old as the high islands themselves. Outside, the mist begins to rise off the grasses. A conch shell sounds in the valley, not from this household, but from a nearby Hoto, a temple where other priests have already begun their sunrise offerings. Its echo reaches the hail just as the chief steps outside, bare feet pressing into dew-cooled earth. He walks in silence. The Kahu follows 4 paces behind, as is proper. Not to serve now, but to witness. The dream has been spoken, the spirit has returned, the cloak has been folded, and the day begins. There will be petitions to hear, canoes to bless, disputes between fishermen to settle. The waking world always waits just beyond the last breath of sleep. But somewhere in the chief's mind, beneath the chants and obligations, floats the image of a torch, burning beneath water. It may return again tonight, or it may never come again. But in ancient Hawaii, the dream is not judged by how it ends. It is judged by what remains: a scent, a voice, a flicker of movement on the edge of the soul. And so we ask ourselves, if the most sacred parts of us rise and wander each night, why do we so often forget where they've been? The fire is nearly out. Only a curl of smoke lingers, barely rising in the cool desert air. Around it, low silhouettes, bundles of wool, saddles, cloth-wrapped jars, dot the sand like soft rocks. And just beyond, under the rising edge of a wind-scoured cliff, a small caravan camp prepares for the night. You are somewhere between Dunhung and Merv, maybe closer to the Taklamakan. The century? Roughly the second or third. The calendar? Irrelevant. What matters now is wind direction. How many hooves were lost today, and whether the stars above are clear enough to guide tomorrow's path. But tonight, there is stillness. The traders, porters, children, cooks, and scribes, who have travelled together across hundreds of stony miles, are finally blessedly quiet. The last bowl of watered rice wine has passed from hand to hand. The pots have been scrubbed with sand and left to dry near the yurt cloth. Someone has even plucked the strings of a dusty rhubarb under their breath, though they stopped before finishing the melody. It is late, and now comes the peculiar matter of how one sleeps when home is motion and the roof is stars. Most sleep on rugs laid over flattened grain sacks. Some use camel packs as windbreaks, while others pile felted wool around themselves in soft mounds, forming little human nests in the sand. There are no pillows, only folded robes, saddle blankets, or even each other's shoulders. The merchants sleep light. Their dreams are often quick, counting coins, checking bundles of silk, revisiting memories of contracts, half fulfilled in cities they may never see again. They rarely speak while sleeping, but sometimes they mutter names, of wives, of enemies, of currencies long out of use. Children, meanwhile, sleep more deeply. One girl, wrapped in a robe far too large for her, snores softly with a carved wooden sheep clutched under her chin. Her older brother has placed a small stone near her feet, smooth and round, warmed by the day's sun. He does not tell her why. It is just what their mother used to do, and now she is gone. There are rules, even out here. No feet toward the fire, no stepping over another's mat, no loud voices after the fourth star rises, and always, always, one pair of eyes remains open. The night guard, not a soldier, just someone who volunteers to remain half awake. They sit with a staff, wrapped in sheepskin, near the edge of the light, listening for footsteps, for wolves, for whispers that might not be wind. They tend the coals, tossing in a root or two to keep them barely glowing. If they hear something, they do not cry out. They whistle once, low and sharp. If no one stirs, they whistle again. But tonight, so far, there is nothing. The camels have stopped groaning, their knotted knees folded beneath them. The donkeys are tied in a ring, tails twitching now and then. But content, even the rats, usually bold around the grain, have kept to the shadows, and so the desert breathes. Sleep here is not marked by comfort, it is marked by necessity, and yet, in its own quiet way, it gathers everyone. A Sogdian translator sleeps curled near a jar of ink, his fingers stained and still. He has dreamt, many times, of letters he cannot finish. The brush dries too quickly. The wind blows the paper away, but tonight he does not dream. His face is peaceful. Near him, a Persian healer lies with a pouch of dried apricots beneath his head. His dreams are cluttered with herbs, names, shapes, root lengths. He once slept in tiled rooms, now long gone. But under this sky, the open air seems to press gently on his chest, reminding him, even now, there is breath. One of the cooks snores through her nose. Her fire-scarred hands twitch occasionally, as though stirring a pot in sleep. And finally, the caravan master himself, a bearded man with cracked lips and a voice like grinding wheels, rests slightly apart from the others, but not far. His sleeping mat is arranged with care, even reverence. He He places a small scrap of cloth over his heart before closing his eyes. It bears the symbol of a merchant's guild back in Samarkand. He has not been there in 17 years. He dreams of wheat, not golden or swaying, but piled in sacks, heavy and ordinary, but in the dream he can carry it, easily. And now, far above them all, the stars remain unchanged. The sky holds its shape. The trade winds murmur secrets to no one in particular. And you might wonder, if sleep is the only true homeland for those who never stop moving, what do they carry home in their dreams? The coals have all but vanished. They glow now only as pinpricks beneath a curtain of thin ash. No flames, no warmth, just the memory of heat. But the cold has not yet claimed the camp. The rugs hold it back, the bodies arranged in quiet formations, alone in pairs and spirals, retain their own kind of heat. The breath of sleep warms wool, warms hair, warms even silence. The night watcher hums. It is not a song with a name, more a pattern of tone and breath, part lullaby, part alertness drill, part meditation for a man with no other company than wind. He rocks slightly as he sings, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp's reach. The stars have shifted again. They tell him two things. The third phase of the night has begun. Head to Ken. No sandstorm is coming. The absence of wind is a comfort. Not absolute, but quiet. Just a low rhythmic brush over the dunes. A desert breathing in sleep, and still eyes open. The night watcher has learned to listen beyond the obvious. A snapping sound could be a fox or a boot. A falling pebble could mean nothing, or everything. One time, 2 years ago, he missed a footfall. The thieves took 4 goats, a child's blanket, a gourd of salt. He has not slept a full night since. Now he adjusts his shawl and continues humming, not quite quietly, just enough that any nearby dreamer might drift deeper instead of rising. This is his job, to protect the right to dream. Meanwhile, sleep has changed its texture in the camp. It is no longer the deep plunge of early slumber, but the fitful, partial dreaming of the second half of the night. The healer mumbles something about walnuts. The child with the wooden sheep rolls over, kicking her warmed stone out into the sand. Someone coughs, just once. The stars above blink, and the caravan breathes together. One of the porters, wrapped entirely in a black cloak except for his nose, opens his eyes. He doesn't move, not even a twitch. But he is awake, staring upward through the narrow slit between his hood and the sky. He counts stars, not constellations. He never learned their names. He counts numbers. He's made it to 94. Then he loses track. He closes his eyes again. Elsewhere, the cook wakes with a start. Not fear, just habit. She has always risen early, even here, even now, but she's confused. It's not yet light. No scent of hot grain, no clang of the pot, no shuffling feet, only her own breath, loud inside her ears. She presses a hand to her forehead, sighs, and lies back down. She will sleep again. She always does. Eventually, in a nearby bundle of cloth, the young scribe twitches. His dreams are different. He sees scrolls unraveling into wind, letters floating like leaves, voices reciting verses in languages he almost recognizes. He clutches a reed stylus in his sleep, like a soldier clutches a blade. When he wakes, he won't remember the dreams, only that he has been writing all night, and still the desert holds them. This is not wilderness. This is cradle. The Silk Roads were not just paths. They were woven rhythms, places of departure, arrival, and importantly, pause. Between caravansaries and oases, there were nights like this, thousands of them, unrecorded, unmarked, but entirely necessary, because the weight of trade is not only measured in silk, jade, or spices, it is measured in rest, in the ability to lie down, body and breath aligned, without fear of vanishing before sunrise. And so the night watcher hums still. His eyes catch something at the edge of camp, a flicker, a stillness. A moment passes. He presses his fingers into the sand, lifts a tiny pebble, and tosses it toward the cook's pot. It clinks once. A signal. Another watcher, further out, returns the gesture. A whistle, not danger, just awareness. Someone is out there, a late traveller, perhaps a fellow merchant running behind, perhaps a goat, perhaps shadow. The desert does not always explain itself. Still, nothing more comes. The stars continue drifting westward. The last moon sets behind a line of low hills. The night watcher stops humming. He knows what time it is. Not by clock, but by feeling. Soon people will begin to shift. The caravan master will rise and say nothing. For 3 full minutes, the girl with the toy sheep will demand water. The healer will stretch until his joints pop, and the first fire will be built, not from desperation, but from ritual. But before that happens, before the world awakens again, there is still a boy asleep with salt on his boots, a grandmother who dreams of eggplants. She once grew near Bukhara. Sit, a blind man, remembering the way Merv smelled in spring. Sit, a merchant who wakes to find sand inside his ear and cannot remember if he laughed in the night. And in that moment, you might ask, if 1,000 nights like this passed unrecorded, is it possible that they're still happening, just behind the dunes of memory? Before the sun rises, the camp stirs, not all at once, never that. The return to wakefulness here is layered, like the wool of the sleeping mats. One rustle, one breath, a creak of leather, a sigh. The sky is not yet pink, but the stars are beginning to blur. A donkey brays softly. The girl with the wooden sheep wakes with it still in her arms. She frowns not out of fear or discomfort, but out of confusion, the kind that belongs only to children, when the dream world begins to recede and the waking world doesn't feel like home just yet. She rubs her eyes. Beside her, her brother stirs. He watches her sit up, yawning, and presses the warm stone back near her feet. She doesn't thank him. She never does, but she shifts a little closer to his side. Elsewhere, the cook is already at the coals. She does not speak, but she moves with precision. Water first, fire second, then barley, then dried plum. The caravan master emerges from his blankets without a word. He wraps his robe, ties it twice, and walks toward the ridge to check the horizon. He is looking for color, for light, but he is also listening for wind, for the sound of hooves that do not belong to them, for anything unusual. Nothing yet. The air is thin and cool, and beneath it, sleep lingers like mist. People rise slowly, the healer, folding his shawl, the translator, blinking with ink-stained fingers. The boy who counts stars has already lost his number, and yet, among all the waking, no one speaks of their dreams. This is a quiet rule of the road, one that cannot be found in scrolls or edicts. It is understood. Dreams in the desert belong to the desert. They are not carried forward, but still, traces remain. The merchant's hand hesitates over a saddle strap. He has buckled 1,000 times before. Sit. The cook adds an extra pinch of salt to the barley. She doesn't know why. Sit. The child hums a tune she never learned, not from anyone still living. And as the day begins, those tiny fragments slip into the folds of morning. The sky grows paler now. Someone calls out for a lost boot. Another laughs. Finally, a sneeze. The camels grunt. The fire hisses. The caravan prepares to move. The rugs are rolled. The jars are tied. The sleeping mats are shaken, not out of cleanliness, but to scatter the last warmth of night. They will not be used again until twilight. As they pack, each person carries more than goods. They carry the weight of rest. It is not rest like a home offers, but it is survival, and more than that, continuity, the ability to fall asleep beneath stars and rise with the same skin, the same name, the same distant destination. It is a kind of trust, really, that the world will still be here when you open your eyes, that the wind will not take your name. They move forward, single file, then double, then a loose procession between stones and saltbrush. Behind them, the campsite disappears within moments. Only the darkened circle of the fire pit remains, a black smudge in an ocean of tan, and you, watching from a distance, might wonder if sleep on the Silk Road was never safe, never soft, and never long. then what did it give to those who walked it, night after night? Perhaps only this: the memory that the road, though vast, once held space for their body, the warmth of a stone passed hand to hand, the sound of a night watcher humming, just to keep fear from waking the others. And maybe, just maybe, the deep knowing that even in the most fleeting of sleep, some things are carried that cannot be stolen. It is nearly midnight in the northern song capital of Kaifeng, and while the city outside the palace walls is sleeping, its wine shops closed, its storytellers silent, its scholars dozing over scrolls, in the innermost sanctum of the imperial palace, sleep is just beginning to be assembled. The Son of Heaven, ruler of all under the sky, is about to rest. But before that happens, a team of trained men in silk robes and soft slippers must ensure that every fold of every sheet, every ember in every censer, and every tick of the official water clock aligns with sleep-worthy perfection. You are watching the eunuchs of the Chamber of Bedchamber Service, or Nightingale, prepare the Emperor's sleeping quarters. Not a single one speaks above a whisper. There is no rushing. Every movement is slow, predictable, practiced 1,000 times. Let us begin with the pillows. Yes, plural. The Emperor does not sleep on just one pillow. That would be unseemly. His position requires 5. 1 for the head, 1 for the shoulders, 1 for the side, 1 at the feet, and 1 small scented one, placed loosely near the hands. Each has a different stuffing: silk floss, fine bamboo curls, puffed reed, and even down gathered from migratory geese in the south. Each has its own registry tag, carefully recorded in the sleeping ledger, which the chief eunuch guards like a sacred text. That ledger, mind you, is not poetic. It reads more like a merchant's inventory. Said, 4th month, 12th day, late watch, head pillow with green dragon embroidery, replaced due to creasing in inner lining. Still, it is considered imperial truth. The bed itself is a raised wooden platform lacquered in deep cinnabar and fitted with a canopy of gauze that drapes down like fog from the mountain pines. Screens surround it, not to block vision, but to absorb sound. The Emperor must not hear footsteps, not even whispers. Even the rustle of robes is trained to fall within accepted acoustic levels. There is a servant whose entire duty is to oil the door hinges, another ensures the water clock does not burble, and a third specializes in adjusting lantern height based on the Emperor's preferred light fall, never directly on his face, but just enough to allow the shadows to flicker like waves on a lake. Now the incense ritual begins. A tiny brass tripod is placed near the foot of the bed, and within it a sliver of aloes wood, a resin so valuable it was stored in government vaults, is lit with a single glowing coal. It is not meant to perfume the entire room. No, just the air between breaths. As the smoke curls upward, the eunuchs exchange glances. One makes a final mark in the ledger. The Emperor will arrive soon, but before he does, let us consider who these men are. They are not ordinary servants, nor mere functionaries. The eunuchs of the Song Court, especially those assigned to the bedchamber, are a distinct class. Most were taken from their families young. Many came from the poorest regions, Yunnan, Hubei, the northern frontier. They were chosen for their composure, their memory, their obedient silences. They could not marry, they could not father children, but they could rise, and some did. A few rose so far they managed imperial documents, whispered counsel to the Emperor himself, or even decided who gained access to the throne room. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, their task is singular, to usher the Emperor from wakefulness to rest without flaw. At last, the moment arrives. The Emperor enters, not in robes of state, but in layered silks of seafoam green and dove grey, colours chosen for their quietness. His hair has already been unbound by an earlier group of eunuchs. His eyes are heavy. He says nothing. He does not have to. He steps onto the platform. One eunuch helps him sit. Another adjusts the shoulder pillow with a tiny flick. A third straightens the scented one near his hands. Then, without fanfare, the curtain is drawn. The Emperor is asleep, but the work is not done. One eunuch now sits just beyond the curtain. He listens for breath, not to intrude, but to ensure the world does not intrude. If the emperor mutters, the words are noted. If he stirs, the pillows are realigned. If he wakes, water is offered, pre-warmed to the exact temperature dictated by the physician's sleep code, written during the previous winter. No word will be spoken unless spoken to. No mistake will be made, and as the soft fragrance of aloes wood curls toward the rafters, and the water clock ticks without spilling a drop, you might wonder, what dreams does an emperor have when his sleep is arranged like a ceremony, and even silence must be measured? One slow inhale, one softer exhale, a rhythm not unlike a tide, and just beyond the edge of the gauze curtain, seated perfectly still with his knees tucked under him, the night eunuch listens. He does not stare, that would be improper. Instead, he watches the faint movement of the canopy silk, how it rises and falls ever so slightly in time with each breath. He records nothing physically, but in his mind, everything is noted. The exact minute the emperor turned on his side, the number of times he adjusted the sleeve of his robe, whether his breathing deepened in the second hour of the ox watch, sometime around 1:30 a.m., even the nature of his murmurs, should any escape his lips. This, to be clear, is not espionage, it is duty. Should the emperor wake coughing, the physician must be alerted immediately. Should he cry out in a dream, a different blend of incense will be prepared the following night, perhaps with powdered sandalwood or clove to calm the inner organs. Should he sleep too still, too silent, for too long, a mirror will be placed near his nostrils to confirm the presence of breath. But tonight, the breath is steady, and so the night eunuch remains still. Behind him, in a separate chamber, the sleep records officer copies the evening's entries into the day watch scroll, a long piece of polished bamboo inscribed daily with the emperor's rest patterns, meal times, emotional state, and pulse readings. No historian will ever read these scrolls. They are burned every 7 days. But while they exist, they are treated as truth. Elsewhere in the palace, things are not still. At the southern kitchens, a cook begins warming rice gruel in case the emperor should wake early. At the stables, a messenger prepares in case a courier is needed to fetch a physician from the outer quarters. Even the incense supervisor, an elderly eunuch with a back shaped like a question mark, prepares a second cone of resin, just in case the first burns too quickly. The emperor does not stir, but dreaming has begun. Of course, no one can know exactly what the Son of Heaven dreams, but the sleep physicians have recorded patterns drawn over years of quiet observation. For instance, if the emperor clenches the corner of his sleeve, he may be dreaming of administrative burdens. If he murmurs names, particularly those of ancestral temples, he may be processing rituals not yet fulfilled. If his feet twitch beneath the robes, it may signal disquiet about war in the southern provinces. The night eunuch, however, allows none of this to distract him. He has done this work for 19 years. He once adjusted the foot pillow for Emperor Zhenzong himself. He remembers nights when lightning struck the roof tiles, when vermilion crows cried from the garden pool, when a concubine, half mad from jealousy, attempted to burn her own sleeves and set the silk wall screens ablaze. But not tonight. Tonight, even the luli glass lamps seem to glow softer. The scent of aloeswood has become faint and folded into the air, like a whisper that has stopped mid-sentence. Time, too, has slowed outside. The night passes through its invisible watches. Rat, ox, tiger. The bells of the palace water clock chime gently at each transition, struck not by gongs but by falling drops into graduated bowls. No clangs, no ticks, just measured soundlessness. And still, the emperor sleeps. There is peace, but also a tension beneath it, because the entire system of the bedchamber ritual is built on a single, delicate truth. If the emperor does not sleep well, the realm may not either. A poorly rested emperor might mistrust his ministers, delay decisions, suffer headaches during ritual, neglect important audiences, or worse, turn to suspicious dreams and omens to guide his choices. Sleep, therefore, is not a luxury. It is a matter of governance. The eunuchs know this, and so they continue. One replaces the incense grain, Another adjusts the curtain's edge by half a finger length. A third tightens the ribbon on a water jug in case the emperor wakes thirsty. Nothing is out of place. Everything is quiet, and you, observing from the corner of this still world, might wonder if the most powerful man in the empire cannot rest without 20 men folding his dreams into shape. What, then, does it mean to truly sleep in peace? The first light is not from the sun. It is from a lantern, a soft glow rekindled by the Denguin Shir, the keeper of the morning lamps. He does not light it with fire, but with a warmed coal from an urn kept sealed throughout the night. This coal has burned for over 200 days, passed from hand to hand each morning, carefully preserved so that no match ever touches the emperor's air. The flame is muted, amber, not gold. It does not illuminate the room, it suggests it. Inside the sleeping chamber, the emperor has not stirred. His breathing is shallow, not from distress, but from the threshold, that final stage between the drifting mind and the assembled self. A eunuch whispers outside the curtain, not to the emperor, to the stillness. The dawn hour approaches. May the Son of Heaven awaken to the soundless blessing of the realm. This is the cue. Two other eunuchs move in tandem. One adjusts the shoulder pillow, the other unfurls a strip of cloth, scented with chrysanthemum water. It is not placed on the face, but near it, so that the scent may rise naturally with breath. Not to shock the senses, only to invite them. The emperor blinks. Once, then again, he does not speak. He sits up slowly, assisted by hands he does not see. A robe is already waiting, warmed against a eunuch's chest for the past half hour, so it will not carry the chill of stone. He slips into it wordlessly. The dream remains in his eyes for a moment. Then it vanishes. No one will ask what he dreamt. To do so would be a transgression. Dreams of the Son of Heaven are considered untouchable terrain, sometimes recorded by the emperor himself in a sealed ledger, sometimes never spoken again, but the eunuchs have their own ways of noticing. The emperor's lips are pressed. His eyes remain unfocused for several minutes. He stands before the water basin longer than usual. When the scented towel is offered, he takes it with a slight pause, not hesitation, but thought. The chamber adjusts itself accordingly. Breakfast will be delayed by 12 minutes. The court physician will be summoned quietly, and a slightly different incense, a blend used during late Tang dynasties to ease philosophical agitation, will be prepared for the writing hall. Nothing is said aloud, but everything is understood. Outside, the birds begin to stir in the upper trees beyond the palace walls. A distant flute, barely audible, echoes from a servant's courtyard. The city of Kaifeng yawns gently in its fog, and here, within lacquered walls and behind woven silk curtains, the world of sleep concludes, not with clamour, but with structure. One eunuch unrolls the sleep record and begins to recite it softly to the chamber steward. Midnight watch, no agitation. Second watch, 2 turns to right side. Fourth watch, murmured syllables. No cough, no dream recorded. The steward nods, makes a gesture with 2 fingers. The document will be burned later today. The ashes will be buried in a garden where no one walks. The emperor, now dressed and composed, walks toward the morning hall. His gait is even, but his mind, perhaps, still drifts at the edges of something unresolved. Did he dream of a mountain? A Favre, a lost calligraphy scroll? Favre, his father, falling through clouds made of brushstrokes? No one will ever know, and that is the point, because the system, the beds, the pillows, the silent watchers and the ledgers, was never built to enter the emperor's sleep. It was built to protect it, to preserve the space in which he might, just for a few hours, be no one, not the ruler, not the judge, not the lineage, just a man beneath a canopy, listening to his own breath. And perhaps you might ask, in a world where the smallest twitch of a royal toe could cause 3 provinces to change their harvest policy, wasn't sleep the last true thing that belonged only to him